If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, The Beginning. Northern Continent, 4th Epoch, Kingdom of Elias. A magnificent city, perched along a mountain range that stretched across the continent, was illuminated by the bright golden sun. The city was bustling with people and filled with Gothic-styled buildings. Carriages with white horses could be seen on the paved road, as could streetlights with green vines intertwining around the pole. The city served as the capital of the Kingdom of Elias, one of the 6 kingdoms on the northern continent, which is located on the edge of Solomon Empire. There was also the occasional laughter of children, who were running along the sidewalk, and gossip of noble ladies in the restaurant. The entire city is filled with vibrancy, contrary to the rumors in the northern continent. In the city center, there was a huge Gothic cathedral with spires topped with a golden sun emblem. The Gothic cathedral was built of white marble, and inside the cathedral was the featured intricate structures and drawings depicting various epics from the past, carved on the wall. In the cathedral's entrance, there was a fountain with a marble statue of an angel with speared wings and open hands in the center, facing the sun in the sky, as if to embrace it. Several believers were also seen throwing coins into the fountain while praying, the coins causing ripples to erupt in the clear water and revealing a large number of golden, silver, and bronze coins within the fountains. Inside the cathedral, nobles, commoners, children, and the elderly sat in various seats facing the main aisle, where a priest with blonde hair and white robes stood before a statue of a god. The priest standing in the aisle had a solemn expression on his face and waved his hands at the bands of musicians, as solemn and high music echoed throughout the cathedral halls. The praying session then began, with believers rising from their seats and tapping 4 times around the chest, drawing the symbol of the golden sun, while facing the statue with a reverent expression. The statue depicted a handsome young man, wearing pure white robes and holding a book of deeds in one hand and a golden sphere resembling the sun in the other. At the bottom of the statue's head was a golden halo with rays of light erupting. Occasus, eternal blazing sun, the god of the sun, order, and business, is the one depicted in the statue. Soon, the praying session came to an end. The priest and believers drew the holy emblems, and they finished loudly with rhythmic music that echoed throughout the hall. Praise the sun! With their prayers, the golden halo behind the statue of the god lit up brightly, illuminating the entire hall of church, as sparks of golden light, resembling golden stars, appeared from the light and fell on the believers. Their expression became more pious at the sight of this, as if the God they believed in had personally blessed them. As the golden light dimmed and vanished from the hall, the believers made their way out. A handsome man sat on a wooden bench near the church entrance, wearing a dress that did not appear to match the style of the other people in this city. The man had an angular face and short white hair, and his golden iris glowed and surged like the burning sun in the sky. If believers exiting the church paid closer attention to him, they would notice that the man sitting here was the same as the god depicted in the statue. The believers, on the other hand, could see him and even determine that he is most likely a foreigner based on his dress style, but they didn't seem to notice the resemblance and continued walking without stopping. The man had a lethargic expression and was tapping his shoes on the ground, as if he was waiting for someone. The man was none other than the White Angel, the one who served under ancient sun god. Yes, it was because the man is no longer the same White Angel. As his thoughts wandered back to his previous life in Earth, the man looked out at the beautiful and vibrant city with slight melancholy. He had a fairly ordinary life. He had just graduated from college, expecting a bright future, only to be confronted with reality. 4. He got a mediocre job, and that's when things started to get worse. The daily monotonous cycle began. The cycle of eating, sleeping, and working remained constant. Even though he received a good salary, it didn't improve his average life. It truly made him wonder a lot about life, because as a child, he dreamed of having a great and fulfilling life, earning a lot of money and saving for the future, and then traveling the world. Now, his younger self's dreams seemed ridiculous, because his entire salary was spent on expenses and bills, leaving little money for him to save. So much for his dream of traveling around the world. However, things were not always bad. He dabbled in fiction to escape his monotonous life, a hobby he abandoned due to the hectic pace of college life. To be honest, this helped him a lot, and it even brought back one of his childhood dreams of becoming extraordinary and living the way that he truly wanted to. However, at the end of the day, he returned to the same work, albeit with a smile on his face. He lived alone because he had moved out of his home at the start of his college. Despite his hectic schedule, he never neglected his family. 4. He would not be where he is today without their love and support. He was honestly looking forward to what the future held for him because he was still young and things could turn around. Perhaps he could still travel with someone he cared about and spend the last days of his life in each other's company. Reality, on the other hand, was far from fair. When he returned home one day, he looked up at the unusual night sky, for the stars shone brightly like never before, and the silver moon in the night sky changed to crimson as he gazed at it, but when he blinked again, the night sky returned to normal. Everything seemed to be just an hallucination to him. This vision kept reminding him of one of his favorite novel, Lord of Mysteries. The crimson moon, in particular, was something he couldn't get out of his mind as he walked on the road sidewalk. All of a sudden, he came to a halt as he became aware of an anomaly around him. He stood alone on the sidewalk, as the people he was walking with and the beeping vehicles on the road vanished. The flickering lights of the skyscrapers had gone dark, and the entire city had fallen silent. He was terrified by what was going on, it was just too creepy. He also felt a tinge of excitement in his heart, which raced along with his overwhelming emotions. Yes, excitement, even if what he has dragged into what may be fatal, because it was his first contact with something extraordinary. Maybe he was really insane at the time. But, before he could act to save himself, the surroundings became hazy and blurry. Everything was slowly fading into oblivion. The darkness engulfed him, knocking him out. Before he went unconscious, he had the impression that whatever was happening to him was not natural, and that he would most likely die as well. Surprisingly, he awoke in an unfamiliar body, and immediately, a flood of memories overflowed into his mind, depicting a fabulous life. The memories merged with him, for he was experiencing and feeling everything, more precisely, it felt as if he were living a second life. From becoming an orphan to being placed under the tutelage of the ancient sun god. Then going on the adventures across the world and battling the mythical creatures. Then, swearing an oath with other kings of angels to always be sworn brothers and achieving glory at the command of the ancient sun god. Finally, falling greed for the power of ancient sun god, which led to him instigating the betrayal. Caucasus betrayed ancient sun god in the twilight of the sun, as his white sword pierced the ancient sun god's heart from behind. Then, becoming the god of the sun pathway. Caucasus, the white angel, lived a fabulous life that included memories spanning thousands of years. In comparison to Caucasus, his existence and life were insignificant. He was gradually losing himself in the process and becoming more and more like the white angel. However, under some unknown power, his remaining self stopped from becoming lost and submerged in the sea of memories. It was as if his remaining self had been anchored by this unknown power. The memories had such an impact on him that he wondered for a moment whether he was Caucasus or the man from the earth and whether this world was fiction or reality. Finally, the memories completely merged with his mind and the realization kicked him. He knew instinctively that he wasn't the same. He had completely changed, whether in his soul or mind. It was as if he had transformed into someone entirely different from who he had previously been. This, however, did not frighten him. In contrast, he remained calm in the face of such adversity. He realized he was no longer who he used to be, neither the white angel nor a modern-day man from Earth. He was a completely different person, to be more precise, he was a combination of two, inheriting the best qualities of both, divinity and humanity. Honestly, he had no idea what he had become. He also knew his future fate: when the ancient sun god recovered, he will face his certain death. It took him a long time to process everything, and he didn't change his name. Because it was also now a part of him. He had accepted his new life and had let go of the past. Finally, he is Caucasus, eternal blazing Sunday. Caucasus' thoughts were cut short by a sudden voice from his left. "Excuse me, sir, do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior, eternal blazing Sunday?" A young man stood in front of the Caucasus and spoke nervously. Caucasus was taken aback, but a smile soon appeared on his face. "Yes." He gave a light reply. Chapter 2, The Angels. The young man composed himself and began under the golden sun. As he began with a reverent look, his nervousness faded and he became solemn. "My Lord claims to be eternal blazing sun. He was born from the Creator's spirit at the beginning of the world. He is also the incarnation of the sun. He is the inextinguishable light that illuminated the world and drives away darkness and evil. He is also the embodiment of order, keeping the world from falling into chaos and depravity. He is also the guardian of business and overseer of contracts. He is also the light of holiness that purifies the world. Your Lord appears to be very powerful." Caucasus' smile widened as he spoke narcissistically. He is indeed. When the young man saw interest in the foreigner that he was tasked to preach, he became more enthusiastic and continued preaching more sincerely. When cataclysm erupted on the world, our Lord descended with other gods. He was the light that illuminated the world and cleansed it of its impurity. During the cataclysm, he used all of his power to protect humanity. It was because of the Lord's kindness that humans survived, while other races perished one after the other in the cataclysm. The humans who followed him established the kingdom of Elias along the Ontal mountains. With his blessings, the kingdom of Elias became one of the most powerful kingdoms on the continent. The young man noticed Ocas's expression change when he said cataclysm, which caused him to pause his preaching. Continue, I'd like to know more about your Lord. Ocas drew his attention away from the ancient sun god and inquired further. The young man continued, despite the fact that he thought this gentleman was strange and most likely a beyonder, because just being in his presence made him calm. My Lord lives in the golden sun above the entire world, and the rays of his kingdom are spread across heaven and land, giving life and light to all. There are 4 angels in total under him. The angel of light is the Lord's most cherished angel, for he is bestowed upon a portion of our Lord's authority. He is the most merciful of all. He also serves as the Lord's representative and sits beside the Lord's throne. The angel of wisdom is the incarnation of knowledge itself. She is also the recorder of long history and the mystery's fate. She was among the first to follow our Lord. Her knowledge is what got our kingdom and humanity through the post-cataclysm warring era. The angel of temperance is the Lord's most mysterious angel. Little is known about him other than his various honorific names, angel of tears and angel of duality. Finally, the angel of miracles, he is the embodiment of the miracles itself. He is my Lord's messenger and the bearer of the Lord's revelations. He is the most generous of all the angels, as he is said to grant a wish to anyone who can find him for only 5 coins. Truly incredible. Ocas had a sigh as he spoke. When the young man heard this, he couldn't help but smile, so he began enthusiastically describing his Lord's miracles and deeds. I'm not going to waste your time anymore, sir, for it's already been 20 minutes. If you are interested, you can visit the Cathedral of Dawn right near us. The Mass has just ended, but there will be another at dusk. Trust me when I say that the Mass experience will be unforgettable for the rest of your life. He finally finished. Ocas's expression didn't change much, he nodded with the smile as before. I'll definitely pay a visit in the evening. The young man turned and exhaled a sigh of relief at the success of his preaching and the addition of another believer to his Lord's religion. Wait! Ocas yelled, causing the youth to turn around. Do you have a problem, sir? The young man was slightly nervous, remembering his strict church school and the fact that if a believer filed a complaint against him, he would face severe punishment. No. Ocas laughed, as if he understood the source of his nervousness. Can you tell me your name? Laius, sir. Subconsciously, the young man said his name. When the youth noticed this, his eyes widened, and he felt a familiar feeling when the gentleman asked his name. Same as, when he faced the high priest, the irresistible feeling to follow every order of the priest. He couldn't even lie and remain silent when the priest asked the question, let alone not answer the high priest's questions. This is a situation that is very similar to this one. The cathedral's high priest is a saint. And this gentleman in front of him. Laius tried to tuck his trembling hands into his robes. Don't worry, Laius. Ocas spoke in a soft voice. By simply hearing his voice, Laius's fear and restlessness vanished, replaced by serenity. Take this as a gift. Ocas pulled a coin with a golden sun symbol from nowhere and tossed it to Laius. For your preaching. The golden coin slid through the air, and the sun symbol on the coin emitted blazing light, causing the coin to gleam before dimming. Laius caught the coin and responded without looking at it. But I can't take it, sir. It goes against. You can have it. Ocas interrogated him in deep voice. It will be fine, and it may even save you from a future disaster. Despite his previous words, Laius nodded dazedly and accepted the coin. He did, however, regain enough clarity to ask a question. May I inquire your name, sir? What is my name? Ocas was taken aback by Laius' question. It's been a long time since I've been asked that question. He spoke in a rather low voice. However, don't you already know who I am, Laius? Ocas said this with a mysterious smile. Laius was also taken aback, and it slowly dawned on him. Despite the fact that he had been speaking to the mysterious man in front of him for quite some time and was still doing so. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't recall the man's features. Laius focused on him again to double-check, his eyes widening as he could now see the man in front of him. His eyes were filled with shock, and his entire body trembled with excitement. "Yuar!" he stuttered in shock. "If fate allows, Laius, we will meet again." Ocasas spoke up, interrupting him. Snap! When Ocasas snapped his fingers, everything in Laius' vision was filled with light. Chapter 3, Lucas Reyes, the Angel of Light. Ocasas stood up from the bench, as he looked at Laius' body dissolving into particles of light, which was blown away with the sway of wind. Laius was just teleported back to his church school. Ocasas walked along the sidewalk, heading to the city's outskirts, until he arrived at the wheat fields. The golden wheat fields stretched all the way to the snowy and steep on tall mountains, swaying in the wind that blew across the fields. The golden sun's rays gave the wheat a more golden hue, as if it shone with bright golden light. Occasionally, workers with scythes were cutting the overgrown wheat along the large fields. Ocasas was now standing on a mud and rocky road, gazing out at the beautiful scenery before him. It piqued his adventurous spirit and satisfied him, which is why he prefers to walk everywhere rather than teleport. Ocasas finally turned away from the gold flight and looked at the empty muddy road on the other side of him. "You can come out now, Lucas." Ocasas' voice echoed down the mostly empty road, with no one in sight until the end of the road. However, just before Ocasas, the golden rays of the sun that illuminated the surroundings turned white as pure white feathers made of light appeared, forming two wings, with a figure made of light materializing in between the wings. The wings swayed and folded as the figure appeared, and the light on the figure faded, revealing a man. He was a handsome man with short, neat blonde hair and blue pupils that glowed. He was dressed in a golden layered white cloak and had a gentle demeanor. Lucas Reyes, the Angel of Light, was the man in question. "My lord," Lucas bowed with solemnity and respect in his tone. "I hope I'm not bothering you?" he inquired because when he arrived, he noticed his lord silently gazing at the scenery before them. Ocasas looked at one of his most loyal angels, who was still bowing with utmost loyalty and reverence. Lucas Reyes had lost his entire family in the attack of the demonic wolf's family remnant. He was on the verge of death, but Ocasas saved him. 4. Ocasas was on a mission to rid of the remnants of non-human races that were still preying on the weak humans in their madness. That mission was personally assigned to him by the ancient sun god. Ocasas also discovered that the boy was born with sun pathway characteristics, and that his parents were most likely from his pathway. So, he took the boy and allowed him to join his legion. Lucas advanced much faster than others, becoming an angel just before the fall of the ancient sun god, and he devoted his entire loyalty to Ocasas in return for everything Ocasas had done for him. Lucas was also kind to his own people but cruel to his enemies. "You're not disturbing anything." As he said this, Ocasas shook his head. "I was just sightseeing, and it occurred to me that I had never done so, and this kingdom you all built is magnificent," he praised, and his eyes bright with emotion, while saying so. Ocasas lost a lot on his path of God. When he attained godhood, he gained divinity, and he became more distant and indifferent. However, his humanity is now as vibrant as his divinity, due to change happened within him. "It was merely our responsibility, my lord." Lucas was humble, even when he received praise from the person he greatly respected the most. And he was still bowing. But, Lucas was also surprised on the inside. He clearly sensed a change in his lord. The lord was not the same as before. He can tell by the tone of his lord's voice and the words, which are different from the usual indifference and way of speaking. "Don't be so modest, Lucas." With a sigh on his face, Ocasas interrupted Lucas' thought. He didn't bother, however, to press more and change Lucas' attitude toward him. Even though he didn't like it, but this world had different rules than life on Earth, and he was also part of this world now. Also, stop bowing. When Ocasas noticed he was still bowing, he motioned for him to stand straight. Lucas stood up from his bowed position and wanted to begin discussing the information that his lord had requested. "Not here." Ocasas once again interrupted Lucas and spoke with a light tone. "Let's go somewhere where no one will be able to hear us." "However, my lord." Lucas didn't understand, so he spoke up with some hesitation. "This kingdom is the Lord's domain, and the order established by his lord is woven into the very fabric of this kingdom's reality. There is no safer place than here, and no one should be able to bypass his lord's power. There is nothing perfect in the world, Lucas. Even my order and rules that spread across this kingdom's reality have some loopholes that the capable can exploit. Ocas's chuckled, exposing Lucas's inner thoughts. Ocas's began walking towards Lucas, while his tone becoming solemn. Lucas, you most likely obtained the information I requested from our spies in the Solomon Empire. You see, there is the problem, the reality of the Solomon Empire is also woven with very distorted rules far more than here, so much so, it won't be wrong to say, that the reality itself obeys Solomon's command. Yet here we are, infiltrating the empire right under Solomon's nose. Thus, while I appreciate your piety and reverence for me, but, don't let it cloud your judgment. I am not omnipotent, as you may believe subconsciously. He said this in a solemn tone, his golden iris glowed as he stood before Lucas. Ocas's had not expected to have such an image in the heart of the Lucas, despite the fact that he understood why it was so. However, he was not even the strongest god in the world, let alone omnipotent. So he needs to change Lucas, because if Lucas continues to believe the same way, he will suffer greatly. It was my mistake, my lord. Under the gaze of the Ocas's, Lucas' head was down and he was slightly shaking, his expression was that of a daze, because he also just realized. Even though Ocas's didn't use any of his authorities, Lucas felt immense pressure on both his body and soul under the gaze of Ocas's. Ocas's sighed as he saw this and rested his hands on his shoulder. All right, let's go. He didn't give Lucas much time to react, as he snapped his fingers, their figures collapsed and dissolved into golden light particles that dissipated in the wind. Chapter 4, Situation of Northern Continent, 1/2. Lucas found himself sitting in a chair, with his lord in front of him, and a white round table with 2 cups and a teapot in the center of the table. They were surrounded by a large field of white flowers, and the golden sun could be seen rising through the horizon, lighting up the entire field. There was also wind in the field, which caused the petals on the flowers to sway and separate before joining the wind. Lucas could now see a vast cluster of petals floating with the wind in the sky, as well as no end to the field, nothing but white flowers as far as the eye could see. Lucas became aware that he was in his Lord's divine kingdom. Despite the fact that he had been here before in his astral body, but this was his first time in his physical body. Lucas was experiencing a wide range of emotions right now as a result of being corrected by his Lord and then being brought to the divine kingdom. Lucas paused for a moment to collect himself. He was now determined not to make any mistakes or cause himself any embarrassment. Then he noticed his lord taking the white teapot from the table. Do you want coffee or tea? Ocas's inquired. Coffee. Lucas took a breather before responding, as he hadn't delved into human needs and habits since becoming a mythical creature. But he didn't dare to say no because it was his lord who made the offer. This situation in front of him reminded him of a slight change he had noticed in his lord. Wait. Lucas came to a halt as he came to the most likely conclusion. Has the lord gained more humanity? He noticed a change in his lord, he was no longer as cold and indifferent as before, and this was the only explanation he could think of when confronted with his lord's change. Yes, I have gained more humanity. Ocas's confirmed it, as if he could hear his thoughts. Let's not delve too deeply into this complicated subject. After handing Lucas a cup of coffee, Ocas's said. Start with the information. Lucas took a sip of his coffee before pulling out a file with a picture on the front and placing it in front of Ocas's. The photograph depicted a man in his 30s with blonde hair and dark brown eyes. He was dressed in a noble coat with a unique clock emblem on the top of the coat's pocket. Mobit Zoroast. Under the image, the man's name was boldly written. Before turning to Lucas, Ocas's took a quick glance at the file. Lucas began reciting the information after noticing his attention. Mobit Zoroast is a viscount of the Solomon Empire and the great-grandson of Duke Perilous Zoroast. He was recently promoted to the Error Pathways Sequence 5 Dream Stealers. He is currently under the care of Duke Perilous Zoroast. Did he have a strange brown book? Ocas's interrogated and inquired. Lucas paused for a moment and recollected, as a book is too common to be found specifically, but they still got a hint. Mobit took part in a recent expedition into ancient ruins led by the Zoroast family. When they emerged from the ruins, Mobit said have been carried a brown book. However, my lord, we are not entirely certain. Lucas concluded. They were able to gather this much information from within the Solomon Empire, only because of Ocas's personal blessings, otherwise, conducting such a detailed investigation of someone would be impossible. Ocas's rubbed his temples and his mind wandered. That book was none other than Groseal Travels, which contained the divine kingdom of the Dragon of Imagination. This book appeared to have very small significance in the original story, as it was even sometimes used as shield by Klein. Ocas's, on the other hand, knew the book was far from simple. If his assumptions are proven correct, he may have gained a significant advantage over Adam. That is why he is personally utilizing his authority to assist them in conducting this investigation. As a god, one might wonder why he doesn't do it himself rather than sending his subordinates over. As he previously said, even as a god, Ocas's is not all-powerful and omnipotent. Solomon's distorted order encompasses the entire Solomon Empire. It's difficult for a god to extend their influence there, only by using all of their power can they get around the order. Actually, one would expect Solomon to immediately stop them after this. However, he did not do so when this exact situation occurred, with Leodro attempting to extend his power into Solomon's kingdom. Solomon, on the other hand, takes it a step further and wages war arrogantly. This situation occurred shortly after the establishment of the Solomon Empire, resulting in a god's war between Leodro and Solomon, which was stopped by Amon-Ines and him due to the amount of collateral damage their fight caused. So, that's why Ocas's uses this way, despite his dislike for the hassle. Lucas, you have been tasked with obtaining that book from him. Finally, Lucas assigned a task in a casual tone, as if it were a simple task. My lord, Lucas said, his voice full of shock and sorrow, as if Ocas's had assigned him a death mission. Well, it is a death mission because they may be able to obtain information, but doing this will immediately draw the attention of Duke Palaz Zoroast, who is Sequence 1, due to this Mobit is under the personal care of the Duke, and Lucas didn't think he could evade the Duke. I'm not sending you on a suicide mission. When Ocas's saw his expression, he smiled amusedly. A change of times is upon us, Lucas. You can finish this task in the midst of the chaos that will soon ensue. His expression turned solemn, as he said it in a roundabout way. A change of the times. Lucas's face became solemn. The last time he heard his lord say this, it was just before the fall of the ancient sun god. Will the Solomon Empire fall? Lucas made an outlandish guess. He believed this was more likely because he was aware of another mission assigned to the Angel of Miracles that was far more difficult than this. What about the war in the border? Ocas's questioned, shifting to a different topic rather than delving deeper into the change of times. Are the casualties increasing? With a light tone, he inquired. Yes, my lord. Lucas took a pause before continuing. Our protracted war with the Church of the Lord of Storms and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom had reached a stalemate until before. However, the saints of the Church of God of Knowledge and Wisdom have recently created a spell containing the power of night and darkness that can be cast on a large scale, restraining our troops at the border. Their divination was also successful, and they managed to circumvent the anti-divination artifact we had. The entire front line had been breached. As a result, there were a large number of casualties. Another side of war that was going on with the Church of the Lord of Storms also suffered a setback as a result of this. As the situation deteriorated, I was forced to fight in the war in order to hold the front lines and save the situation. Lucas spoke with solemnity and desperation. Another major piece of news that Lucas wanted to share was this: the war had devolved into a disaster for them. Only his intervention saved what was left, but thankfully it also halted their advance into Elias' kingdom. So, they had failed miserably in the war, and he was unsure how his lord would react. Even so, he is willing to accept responsibility because he was the commander of the entire legion stationed there. Amon-Ines and Hirabergen, Ocas's rubbed his temples, regretting his previous negligence to the war. But a lot of things happened to him that took up most of his time. This was giving him a headache. If Hirabergen could gain Amon-Ines as an ally, the situation would shift in Hirabergen's favor. Chapter 5, Situation of Northern Continent, 2 halves. Ocas's will still be able to find the god of combat, but the giant's brain was filled with nothing but muscle, and its entire life was played out in the hands of Amon-Ines. He was so certain of Amonine's involvement because, while the use of night in war may appear simple to others, it had a completely different meaning to Ocas's. For the long-running conflict between him, Leodro, and Hirabergen is the result of them being in adjacent pathways and primarily over anchors. Thus, the significance of the war is clear, and the appearance of power of night on such a grand scale is not the result of some saint's simulated power. Without Amonine's consent, something like this will not happen on a large scale. Soon, this situation will evolve into a domino effect, with Angles soon joining the fray and even forcing him to personally join the battlefield, which Ocas's doesn't want to see. It's not that Ocas's doesn't want to fight with his sworn brothers, but with the Solomon and true creator on the horizon, now was not the time. Ocas's drank a sip of coffee to soothe his tumultuous emotions. It's my negligence, Lucas. Ocas's spoke in a solemn tone. It's not your fault, you couldn't have predicted the situation. He interrupted Lucas, who was about to speak up and take responsibility for his actions. In relation to this war, Ocas's came to a halt, his expression thoughtful. Lucas was nervous as he waited in silence for his lord's plan, and he was surprised that his lord didn't blame himself for the situation on the front lines, but this doesn't make him happy, rather felt more guilty. Don't go aggressive, only be defensive in the war. Ocas's finally spoke up, his voice deep. Unless another angel intervenes, leave the situation alone. Lucas accepted his lord's commands and didn't inquire too deeply, knowing that there had to be a deeper reason for his lord to say so. Did my messenger come back, Lucas? Ocas's inquired suddenly. No, my lord. He has yet to return, and we have been unable to contact him. Lucas immediately spoke up, slightly nervously, because the messenger of the Lord is also his friend, Angel of Miracles. You don't need to be concerned, he's fine. Ocas's laughed as he spoke. His life is too powerful for him to die. Yes, the Fool pathway is too special, and with the blessing he had given his messenger, so he will have no trouble completing the mission he had assigned to him. Ocas's had previously assigned 2 missions to the Angels of Light and Miracles. Both are crucial to his future plans. The Angel of Miracles is tasked with contacting Solomon's subordinates, Turnost and Elitza Tudor, and obtaining information on Solomon's status. He was also fairly certain of the mission's success because he knew the future and situation within Solomon Empire. While the empire may appear to be powerful, the corruption and conflicts within the empire were far more than their side. Trunsoest and Alista are 2 angels he had seen before, and he saw genuine concern for the empire in Turnoest's eyes and a thirst for power in Elitza. All they needed was a gentle nudge in the right direction and make them think it is their own decisions. Ocas's was confident that he could achieve his goal and bring the Solomon Empire down. To be honest, Ocas's loathed Solomon. It was primarily because Solomon accommodated the true creator in his kingdom that he and the other gods were forced into this precarious situation. Knowing the future and the situation, Ocas's can make a reasonable guess that Solomon is now looking for the uniqueness of Justiciar and Sequence 1 characteristics of the Hand of Order. Ocas's can't let something like that happen. So, despite the fact that this was a high-risk mission for an angel, it had to be completed if he wanted to bring all the gods together and make them realize the threat of Solomon and the true creator combined. This was also how he intended to deal with the ongoing war between the kingdoms. All right, let him come and meet me when he gets back. Ocas's told Lucas, and asked on. Are there any other special news in the kingdom? Lucas' uneasy heart settled when he realized the Angel of Miracles was fine, and he then answered his lord's query. As a result of the sudden outbreak of a new disease and disasters on the outskirts of the continent, there is an increase in the number of refugees entering our kingdom. This disease is also spreading quickly and is extremely lethal. Tens of thousands have already died as a result of it. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are pouring into our and other kingdoms as we speak, my lord, and the situation on the continent's rim is deteriorating. The kingdom of Hail under Earth Mother has already sent an angel to find a cure to this problem, and an angel under Lord of Storms has also gone to stop the disaster. And we have confirmed that this entire situation is connected to the infamous Cheek, the king of angels of the Demonis pathway. Lucas purposefully emphasized the word king, causing Ocas's to smile. However, Ocas's did not feel much in his heart hearing about this disaster and deaths. This was not due to the divinity that was making him indifferent, this really did not cause any ripple in his heart. Because he was instinctively indifferent to things that were unrelated to him because of the vast experience and knowledge he had accumulated in these 2 lives. Has Cheek completed her preparations for the godhood ritual? Ocas's was thoughtful, since the ritual to become to God for the Demonis pathway is not easy. It was fraught with peril and necessitated the right set of circumstances in order to be carried out. He couldn't wait to see how Cheek would pull it off. Accept the refugees, and it should be no problem to accommodate them. As for Cheek, just keep an eye on the situation. Ocas's gave orders and didn't bother with Cheek because he already has a lot on his plate. Gods, contrary to popular belief, do not label themselves as good or evil, nor do they care. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal interests. Lucas nodded and resumed with more important news. There are also a large number of Hermit Pathway Beyonders requesting for protection and to join the church. I planned to wait until I heard from you, but the Angel of Wisdom came forward and personally accepted them. They were defectors from Moses' ascetic order. They showed signs of losing control, and their spirits were unstable. This was observed in almost all of them, prompting us to look into it further. After that, we concluded that they had been corrupted by an unknown source. This corruption had caused them to nearly lose control, but the situation could still be salvaged. However, this situation prompted us to discover that there is a major problem within Moses' ascetic order, and based on the information we gathered from them, there has been a major failure on a very important experiment. But, they couldn't recall anything else related to this experiment. When the Angel of Wisdom attempted to pry further into the situation, she was stopped by a higher power. Despite the failure, the Angel of Wisdom discovered that the one who interfered with her was the artisan, the king of angels of the savant pathway. Lucas finished by taking a breather. Aucus's expression becomes solemn, as he heard this. Despite their adjacent paths, the relationship between the artisan and Moses' ascetic order has always been subtle. Aucus made an unfounded assumption as to what the problem with Moses' ascetic order might be. If his guesses are proven correct, this is a serious problem and would explain a lot related to future events. Go ahead. Aucus stated, while not providing any instructions on this. At the command of Aucus, Lucas was jolted from his relaxed state and continued to provide detailed information about the kingdom's situation. Aucus sat with his hand on his chin, patiently listening to Lucas' report and providing some instructions and orders in between. This continued as the light of dawn from the rising sun illuminated their figures. Chapter 6, The Last Supper. The next day. The gentle wind blew across the vast flights of white flowers and the rays of twilight shaded the sky in a mix of red and orange glow, making the entire sky more mesmerizing. A white castle was present in the seemingly infinite space, as its outline was faintly visible from a distance. The white castle was perched on top of a mountain. The castle appeared old but not dilapidated, and it had a large number of turrets and towers extending from it. The castle featured stained glass windows depicting a knight in white armor holding a white sword and a golden sun above his figure. There was a large lake in front of the castle that had no ripples or waves, giving it a nearly mirror-like surface. The reddish-orange hue in the sky and the white castle reflected in the lake, and there were also some boats seen tied to the dock. This place was beyond breathtaking, and one could get a sense of its grandeur just by looking around. A man casually sat in a chair on one of the castle's balconies, holding a white porcelain cup filled with coffee in one hand and a book in the other, reading it while taking a sip of coffee. The man's expression was calm and peaceful, his handsome angular face illuminated by the sun's twilight. The man was none other than Aucus, who was drinking coffee and reading one of the popular novels at the time, which a believer sacrificed to him. Yes, there is still some entertainment in the world. Since the beginning of the Third Epoch, novels, theater, museums, and art exhibitions have been present across the eastern continent. But, nobody could figure out how these forms of entertainment came to be, for there was no clear precedent in history, and they appeared out of nowhere. Aucus knew who was behind it all. It was Ouroboros. Ouroboros was an art nerd to the core. Despite the fact that the ideas for this originated from ancient sun god, Ouroboros was the one who actively pushed everything behind the scenes. Looking back, Aucus was a little surprised at how Ouroboros single-handedly staged the Renaissance back then. His friendship with Ouroboros was actually quite good because he, too, enjoyed painting and they had gone on adventures specifically for this purpose. However, everything between them broke, at the day of his betrayal. And, the majority of his drawings are in his White Castle's walls. Aucus will occasionally look at these paintings to reminisce about the past. Wait. Aucus's rambling thoughts came to a halt as he remembered something. That painting. He received a sacrifice near the beginning of the Fourth Epoch. Shortly after becoming a god, it was a painting painted by Ouroboros himself. The painting's title was Last Supper, which is quite ironic now that he knows the past mythology and he didn't expect Ouroboros to have the courage and audacity to actually draw something like that. Image here. The painting depicted him, Leodro, and Hirabergen standing before the corpse of the ancient sun god, which was laid in the stone slab. Aucus tore open the chest of the ancient sun god and took the beating heart of the creator into his hand, while Leodro tore apart the creator's hand and Hirabergen held the sword directly above the creator's head, as if about to sever it, while the background of the painting was completed dark. When Aucus saw the painting at the time, he was furious, for no one will be calm and collected if their actions and stories are depicted in this manner. This was exacerbated by the fact that he was still conflicted about his choices and hadn't fully accepted them at that time. This caused quite a stir at the time, because not only did he receive the painting, but so did Leodro and Hirabergen. To top it all off, Amun was the one who orchestrated everything, stealing this painting from Ouroboros and sacrificing to them in the hopes of causing chaos. Amun came severely close to achieving this goal, as war nearly broke out between the Solomon Empire and 3 other kingdoms. However, it was brought to a halt by the intervention of other gods, and Amun suffered the most as a result of his actions, while the painting was decided to be destroyed. This was also when Amun was dubbed the blasphemer for daring to provoke the 3 gods. Looking back now, Acasus didn't fell much anymore. He had completely accepted his actions and choices that he decided at the time. He had no regrets about betraying Ancient Sun God, even after learning that Ancient Sun God would be resurrected. He carved for power and strength, and this was his nature, so he didn't question or feel guilty about his actions, despite now knowing what could happen in the future. Acasus sighed and placed the novel on the table, while drinking more coffee to calm his nerves. To be honest, the survival of the Ancient Sun God did not surprise him, because he had never thought of himself defeating his previous lord so easily, and he had always known that he would face him again one day. But it was Adam's situation that really surprised him, and his previous self had never even considered this possibility. However, the past no longer matters. Acasus can only plan ahead and achieve his goal. Knowing what might happen in the future is a huge advantage in this world. Despite the fact that there are numerous ways to pry on the future and destiny in the world of mysteries, nothing compares to the knowledge of future that he now possesses. But, the future also started change to an unknown direction since Acasus was reborn. It will not follow the original timeline at all, and Acasus did not bother to keep it up. Because, from the time being, he has set his plans in motion. His adversaries will not simply sit back and watch, but will take their own actions. Acasus knows that if Adam finds out about his actions, he will not let it happen. Especially if the Groseal travels are what he believes it to be. So, one way or another, the future is bound to change, and he must be prepared to deal with any situation that arises. Nonetheless, Acasus has an advantage in addition to knowing the future. Before, he discovered that the original creator's will within him was weaker than before. When he found this, he was completely perplexed, and he specifically conducted an analysis on himself to determine the situation within him. He eventually concluded that the original creator's will within him was weakening over time, albeit slowly. Acasus was not delighted when he discovered this, as one might expect. After all, he couldn't find the cause of this, even using all of his powers, and he also tried to see if he had any other powers that were causing it. But he couldn't find any. All he had were the authorities of the sun pathway. The reason for his apprehension was because nothing was free in his world, for free things were the most expensive. He has a hunch that his situation is also related to the transmigration. Finally, Acasus sighed and decided to stop thinking about the complicated issues for which he couldn't find answers with his current strength and instead focus on the present. He could only use this explanation to cheer himself up and prepare to deal with problems as they arose. As for why the weakening of the original will gives him a huge advantage, it's mostly because he no longer has to spend a portion of his power suppressing the original will and can use his authority to its fullest. This situation is not without a precedent. During the Second Epoch, Lilith and Ferubity were more powerful than other gods due to their pathway originating from the outer gods, and the outer gods couldn't influence them because the barrier completely prevented it. However, Acasus' chaotic thoughts were interrupted when a blaze of light erupted directly in front of him, revealing a golden star that continued to pulsate. Suddenly, the star's bright light began to dim, and it started to become static, as though it was dying. When Acasus saw this, his face became solemn, because he felt his connection with the Angel of Wisdom weakening and almost serving. He immediately raised his hand to grab the star. The dying star immediately emitted a blazing light that engulfed him, and he vanished from his kingdom. On tall mountains, Acasus gazed at the strange scene with his golden irises that glowed with rage evident in it. Chapter 7, Symphony of Apocalypse. As he stared at the strange scene, Acasus took a moment to calm down his raging emotions. Before him was a vast shimmering light curtain that stretched as far as the steeps of the mountains, seemingly without end. The entire light curtain was expanding at an incredible rate, and the curtain occasionally gave off an ethereal glow, as if it shimmered. However, in the eyes of the Acasus, this mystical scene was different. All he was looking at was not a light curtain, but information. Everything behind the curtain was nothing more than a tangled mess of disorganized information. Whatever was engulfed by the curtain had lost its sense of reality and had been reduced to basic fundamental blocks of information. Everything that transformed was briny assimilated and woven together to form a strange creature. Whether it was living or non-living before the transformation didn't matter. Acasus can see the information inside following towards the center and assimilating together, forming a strange white whirlpool in the center. He can see a woman in the middle writhing in agony, her body mutating uncontrollably as if she were on the verge of losing control. Aukas's wasted no time in appearing in front of the expanding curtain and raising his hand to touch the curtain. He came to a halt, because something captivated his attention. Aukas's noticed a weak influence attempting to establish a connection through the information or knowledge known mixed within this chaotic whirlpool that was merging with the women at the time. Aukas's looked up at the night sky, only to see a brown planet shining brightly. It was more like a blazing star than a planet. Soon, a haunting melody echoed right beside his ears as he gazed at the bright brown planet. Before reaching the ears, the melody seemed to reverberate throughout the astral world. Aukas's heard a song so alien that it couldn't have been composed by humans. No, it can't be even called a song or melody, it's more like a terrifying sound from the infinite abyss or void. The sound seemed to transcend all of nature, as if it represented the concept of sound itself. This sound was truly horrifying enough to chill most people to their bones, but it was also mesmerizing and enthralling, completely capturing the listener's attention and tempting them to listen more, despite the horrifying feeling aroused within. Despite being anything but human, it completely evoked the undeniable nature of humanity, curiosity. Aukas's felt the might of the sound at the time, despite the fact that it had no power to affect him. Just hearing the sound left an indelible impression on him. He couldn't even put words together to accurately describe the sound. This led him to discover that the sound had the ability to drive all beings under angel insane simply by hearing it, for the sound was beyond what a human mind could bear. Inextinguishable ravings. Aukas's recalled the name of an outer god who was vying Earth from outside the barrier. And he couldn't believe that the outer god was able to establish a weak connection to Earth through knowledge and information, even though this connection couldn't possibly be used to send any power, but the outer god was still able to establish a connection through the barrier. Aukas's had never been so serious as he stared at the brown planet in the starry sky, and the haunting sound echoed in his ears. Aukas's golden iris began to glow, and soon his entire eyes were filled with light. A golden divine halo with light rays appeared right beneath his head. Aukas's expression became increasingly indifferent as a divine aura erupted from him. He shifted his gaze to the curtain in front of him. Freeze! He spoke in an emotionless tone that reverberated through the space. The shimmering curtain stopped in its path and the never-ending chaotic information became static. In the midst of it all, the screaming woman fell silent. Everything outside the curtain was frozen in an instant, the swaying petals, the flying birds, and the slow-moving night clouds, everything stopped in their path. Aukas's used his authority of order and the entire reality had been frozen under his command. Aukas's turned to look the woman, his eyes still emotionless. The woman finally stopped screaming, and her process of losing control came to a halt as well, as it too was frozen. Aukas's turned to face the brown planet in the starry sky, which was still shining brightly, after seeing she was fine. He raised his hand, brought his middle and index fingers together, and snapped. Snap! That sound echoed around the world as the bright light of dawn erupted from the world's horizon and the blinding golden sun rose. The sun rose from the horizon at breakneck speed, reaching the center of the sky almost immediately. The blazing golden sun suddenly expanded and became extremely large, as if it desired to occupy the entire sky of the world. The brown planet, which had previously shone brightly, was completely obscured by the golden sun and vanished from the sky. Aukas's could hear the sound coming from the astral world becoming increasingly distorted, as if representing the outer god's rage. Then everything went quiet as the connection to the starry sky was severed. His eyes dimmed and returned to normal, and his indifferent expression faded, giving way to a grave expression. The golden divine halo behind his head vanished, as did the enormous golden sun above him, returning the sky to night's embrace. The night sky, however, had changed, as there were no twinkling stars or crimson moon. Aukas's looked up again, this time to see the only darkness, which was like a veil that draped the entire sky, blocking and serving any interference from the starry sky. Amon-Ines was one who took action immediately after him. Even though everything seemed to take a long time, it had only been a few seconds. I didn't think they would be able to expand their influence on Earth during this time period. Aukas's pondered with a sense of helplessness. It appeared that after the fall of the ancient sun god, the barrier weakened significantly. As he walked forward towards the frozen curtain, Aukas's recalled the conversation between Klein and Adam in the original book. He eventually stopped thinking about it because he couldn't stop it even if he tried, and instead focused on the frozen curtain and reality that surrounded him. Here, he did not remove the law that had been established prior to using his authority of order, but instead began walking towards the curtain. Aukas's raised his hands, and out of nowhere, a book appeared in his hands. Then he walked through the curtain, which was filled with an endless chaotic flux of information. Ocasys opened the book with empty white pages, which began flipping automatically with his actions, in the blurry environment with no sense of reality. When he saw this, he snapped his fingers again, and the frozen chaotic information moved, this time towards the book in Ocasys' hands rather than the women. The book appeared to become a magnet that attracted all of the chaotic information in the surrounding area. As the information was absorbed into the book, the empty white pages began to fill with distorted letters and paragraphs. Soon, the surroundings returned to normal and the brown book was filled with content and the cover was closed after it. The curtain had vanished, and everything inside it was restored to same as it was before the curtain engulfed it. Now, Ocasys stood in the green grass, facing the massive great tower with stained windows depicting a purple eye that contained countless resplendent stars. This was the residence of the Angel of Wisdom under him, which also had been restored. However, Ocasys did not enter right away. He took the book in his hand and began to open it. As he began reading, his expression became solemn and serious. Inextinguishable ravings, the blatherer from the infinite void, the originator of all sounds, the one who plays the symphony of apocalypse that heralds the end of everything. As he stared at these distorted words, Ocasys took a breather to calm his complex emotions. Symphony of Apocalypse. Ocasys felt sense of powerlessness as he looked at this and thought the future, for even as a god, he wouldn't stand a chance against an outer god, though he might be able to escape if he was lucky. He kept turning the pages and saw more information about inextinguishable ravings, from it staying in Saturn to even performing a ritual pointing to it. Well, this knowledge is far too precise. Ocasys analyzed. It's no surprise that the outer god was able to establish a connection through this. But even I and the other gods should be unable to obtain such knowledge unless the source of this. Ocasys' eyes widened as he considered something. Artisan and Moses' ascetic order. Ocasys thought of the new information. The accident. It seemed like I should pay a visit to Artisan. Ocasys reflected as his eyes flashed with coldness and indifference. He then resumed to look of the new pages, eventually coming to a halt on a page that displayed something different. Sequence 9 Mystery Prior, Sequence 8 Melee Scholar. Sequence 1 Knowledge Emperor. Potion Formula. Main ingredients, 1 Knowledge Emperor beyond her characteristics. Supplementary ingredients, the Book of Knowledge. Chapter 8, Sequence 0 Hermit. Sequence 0 Hermit. Potion Formula 3 Knowledge Emperor beyond her characteristics and the Hermit's uniqueness. Ritual Seclude yourself and research into the laws or truth of the world. Then, using that knowledge as a fulcrum, create a new law and let it to successfully integrate with the world. Finally, consume the potion for advancement. Well. Ocasys' thoughts wandered to the past as he observed the ritual for becoming a hermit. This ritual. Despite having seen the first blasphemy slate and the majority of the ritual of becoming God, Ocasys still felt the ritual for hermit was one of the most difficult to complete, because analyzing the laws of the mysteries world is dangerous in and of itself, and creating a new one is even more so. Still, the new law that can be created does not need to be particularly influential, it may simply be a new natural law that has no bearing on the grand scheme of things. However, it must successfully integrated with the world. This is the most difficult step to complete because the law can be incompatible with the world, so fail in the process, resulting in the complete collapse of the ceremony. Will she have the potential to become a god? Ocasys had a slight expectation of his Angel of Wisdom. He was eager to see if she could become the hermit if given the chance. Ocasys stopped thinking more about into it, because he didn't know the status of hermit's uniqueness. However, he knew where the characteristics of the Knowledge Emperor were, and there was one with the Mosaic ascetic order, another with the Artisan, and last one was with Lilith, Earth Mother, who obtained it at the end of the third epoch. Ocasys finally closed the book after skimming through the rest of it, which was filled with other pathways potion formula, and looked at the great tower. An image of a black-haired woman flashed through his mind. She was unwavering in her pursuit of knowledge, no matter what it took in the path. His lips curled into a smile, which quickly faded as he considered her condition. Soon, his face became sullen. He looked up to see the top of the tower as his figure began to fade and vanished. He appeared in a massive yet dimly lit room filled with esoteric books and various drawings of complex structures or technologies far beyond this era. There was also a small model of the solar system in a table, with the names of the planets written on it. There was also a drawing of a starry sky with constellations right nearby. A massive telescope was erected on a platform, and it was extended outside to face the night sky through the rather open ceiling. There were several tables around the platform, each with stacks of paper with notes and calculations written on it. Ocas's took a look around and his attention was immediately drawn to the woman who was lying on the ground with a pool of crimson blood surrounding her. She was completely frozen, even her painful expression and mutation were visible in this state. The woman had black hair and wore a traditional blue robe that was completely soaked in blood, and before she was frozen, she appeared to be trying to clasp her hands together, as if she wanted to pray for help. The woman's body seemed to have been mutating and collapsing, as her entire skin around her hand, cheek, legs, and neck split open and the flesh inside contracted to form eyeballs around her body. Her hair appeared to be growing abnormally long. Seeing her state only fueled Ocas's rage. He immediately appeared right in front of her frozen body and immediately touched her glabella on her head with his index finger. A golden light erupted from the contact, and the light shone on the black-haired woman's mutating body. The black-haired woman's body immediately began to heal, and the eyeballs on her body melted away, and ruptured skin fused together, and her hair stopped growing and returned to normal. Under this light, the blood in her robes also evaporated. Her face regained vitality as it turned rosy under the light's illumination. In the end, Ocas's looked at his angel of wisdom with some apprehension. Her name is Diana Knight. Diana was a popular woman in the Third Epoch. She was hailed as an innovative inventor and researcher, and she was even compared to artisan by some, who was also very popular at the time. She was born to ordinary parents, but her family was somewhat wealthy, and the money would be sufficient to support her for the rest of her life even if she did not work. As a result, she had a happy childhood. But the good times didn't last long for her because her father became ill and died soon after, and her mother followed shortly in his footsteps, leaving her alone in his world. She had a difficult life after that, but things improved when she discovered her passion when she went to an exhibition put on by an organization under Artisan, which displayed various new inventions. Then, she had spent almost all of her money on pursuing her dreams and aspiring to be extraordinary. Her opportunity came, when someone her parents knew introduced her to the path of hermit. Diana rose to prominence on the Eastern continent as a result of her natural talent in the field of research. But her thirst for knowledge grew day by day, to the point where she set her goal to be to discover the truth of the world and unravel its mysteries when she was only just a demigod. Soon, she suffered for her unrestrained pursuit of knowledge. She delved into mysteries of the Second Epoch and non-human gods, then ventured into ancient ruins. She would have died if she hadn't met Ocas's, who was on an adventure with Arobus on their painting quest. Ocas's saved her not because he pitied her, but because his intuition as an king of angels told him that Diana was special, and he also needed high sequence beyond of hermit pathway in his legion. Arobus looked at Diana and also confirmed his intuition, by saying that her destiny is quite special and unusual. Ocas's took Diana and allowed her to join his legion, but only after warning her about her pursuit of knowledge, saying that without sufficient strength, some knowledge should never be uncovered. He, to be honest, didn't have much hope for her at the time, given her character. However, in the end, she really managed to surprise him. As a result of that incident, she changed and learned from her mistakes. She performed her duties in his legion to the best of her abilities, but she didn't completely lose her thirst for knowledge, though she was more restrained than before. Then, at the start of the Fourth Epoch, she managed to become an angel. Now, Ocas's retracted his hand from her glabella as her brows trembled, then she opened her eyes. He truly cared about all of his subordinates, they were the ones who stayed by his side even when he left all alone after what happened, and they remained loyal to him regardless of his decisions. So, even though he had previously become apathetic, he still kept an eye on his subordinates and occasionally assisted them. As a result, seeing Diana in that state really enraged him. Diana groaned as she sat up and rubbed her temples, and her blurry vision became clearer as she regained control of herself and remembered the previous situation. Am I still alive? This was the first thought that came to her mind. She clearly remembered an unknown entity trying to forcefully impart enormous information and knowledge into her mind when she was about to make a new discovery. She couldn't even stand up to that entity, and she had the absurd notion that the unknown entity was the embodiment of knowledge itself. The knowledge was so vast and foreign that even she, a sage, couldn't comprehend it, thus causing her to nearly lose control. She thought she was going to die, and she couldn't even summon any strength to pray to her lord. She was completely helpless. Diana, what did I say to you before? A deep voice interrupted her thoughts, causing her to jolt up from the ground and turn to face the source of the sound. Diana noticed her lord who stood before her. Well, she knew who saved her now, but this only made her feel more useless and incompetent, as she was always the one in the group who made the blunder and caused trouble, and getting saved. She really wanted to be better. She also knew her lord was angry despite his emotionless face because she could tell by looking at his glowing eyes, and the surrounding temperature rose with his words. Don't get lost on the path of knowledge. Ocasas warned her as he approached her. Even though what happened now was not her fault, he remained her due to his worry. And, by combining future events and news, he can somewhat guess what happened here. The issue is most likely due to Hermit's uniqueness. Ocasas speculated. I hope it hasn't come to life yet. Yes, the entire situation is most likely related to the birth of the hidden sage, and he is now certain that the artisan played a significant role in it. He would gladly stop the birth of hidden sage if he could. However, the situation is still unclear, and he needs to meet with artisan to clarify a lot of things. Ocasas did not want the hidden sage to be born, rather, he preferred that an actual beyonder to ascend and become the hermit. Chapter 9, Hidden Sage. Me lord, there had been minor armishap here. Diana stuttered as she tried to stand straight and regained control of herself. Finally, she managed to force a smile, which looked even worse than her crying face. I apologize for disturbing you again. Diana was a proud and fearless woman, so even though she was an angel serving under her lord, she preferred to be independent and not always reliant on Ocasas, like Lucas. She wished to grow in strength and progress further in her own path. So, she really hated herself when she caught with up situations like this again and again, and believe her, she makes blunder quite frequently. So much so, she wondered if she had been targeted by that eccentric snake of Mercury, who has a very dark heart despite having the appearance of an innocent boy. Ocasas sighed after looking at her state with complex eyes. He waved his hand, and a table with 2 chairs appeared in front of them. Diana and her lord were now sitting in the chair, despite the fact that they had previously been standing. She began rubbing her temples, as she felt the sequelae. Despite the fact that her lord mostly healed her, she still had some lingering effects from what happened. It was truly horrifying to have knowledge and information forced on you. To put it another way, Diana felt as if someone had squeezed all the knowledge and forcefully twisted it into her mind. It was as though a sharp object had been pierced right into her temple and inserting it right into her brain, followed by a twist. Now, an aroma assaulted Diana's nose, jolting her out of her trance. Drink this. Ocasas passed a cup of hot tea that smelled grassy and light. It might help you regain control of yourself. Diana didn't think much as she took the cup in her hands and took a sip almost immediately. Her dizziness in her head immediately subsided, and her spirit was revitalized. Her mind and vision became instantly clear, and the sequelae she was experiencing were washed away. Diana stared at the tea, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. What is the recipe, my lord? Diana said that out loud, without giving a second thought. Ocasas responded with a new question. Do you think it's good? He brewed the tea himself, so his divinity also slightly affected the tea, that is also why it's so effective for her. Yes, it's the best tea I've ever had. Diana responded quickly, and she didn't hold back on her complaints, assuming that the tea was most likely made by her lord. Well, you can pray to me after that, and I'll give you the recipe. Ocasas said with a smile. Now, let's get to the point, shall we? His smirk faded as he said this, giving way to a solemn expression. Diana was also aware of the gravity of the situation, so she refrained from making light of it as she had previously. Yes, my lord. Diana nodded, just a moment. She spoke solemnly after raising her hand to her head and touching her temple with her index finger. Then, a dim white light appeared from the contact, and Diana moved her hand away from her temple as if she sensed it. The light brightened as a wisp of light extended from her temple, one end of which was clasped onto the index finger. The wisp of light eventually separated from her temple. Diana shook her hand in the left side of the table after a brief glance at the wisp. The wisp of light detached from her finger and became illusory before blending into the surrounding reality. It caused the entire reality surrounding the table to become hazy and blurry, and then everything went dark. Ocasas and Diana remained seated at the table, holding a teacup, despite the fact that everything around them was nothing but darkness. The darkness was immediately illuminated by a dim light, revealing a scene in which Diana was skimming through various notes and sketching. This is my memory. Diana stated as she stood up from her chair and began walking towards herself. As a sage, it is very simple to extract memory from their minds. Ocasas got up and followed her. He looked around, the details of the memory almost perfectly matching reality, as it was reconstructed according to Diana's subconscious, and the memory is also in a different perspective. This has a lot of similarities to pensive experience in Harry Potter. Aukas's thoughts returned to the past as he walked with the Diana. I was just trying to uncover some old secrets, my lord. Diana's words brought him back to reality, and she continued with a distressed expression, pointing to herself in the memory. That's when it started. Aukas's looked around at the scene before it abruptly changed, as a blurry eye appeared right behind Diana. The blurry eye didn't appear to be fully formed. The eye also didn't hold any emotions, and Aukas's couldn't feel any life in it either. In the memory, an almost imperceptible light shot out of the eye and struck Diana, who appeared to be completely unaware of the danger lurking behind her. Then, the eye disappeared. Diana fell to the ground and began to lose control because she couldn't comprehend the information provided by the eye. Soon, the situation proceeded to what happened before, as the everything surrounding her lost a sense of reality and started breaking into information. Diana's expression worsened as she witnessed the process. She really wanted to find out what that eye was, but she eventually stopped herself because she was afraid that something even worse would happen if she did. Enough of that, Diana. The sound of Aukas's voice echoed in her ears, instantly calming her nerves. Diana paused for a moment, then waved her hands around. Her actions caused the surrounding space to crack as if it were a mirror, eventually collapsing on itself. Eventually, they returned to reality, sitting in the same chairs, facing each other. What is that eye, my lord? Diana questioned him right away. That was the hermit uniqueness. Aukas's responded calmly, as if the incident didn't bother him in the least. Uniqueness. Diana's eyes widened, as she was taken aback by the fact that what had instilled her knowledge was the uniqueness itself. However, this confirmed her previous feeling, as hermit uniqueness does indeed embody the knowledge. However, uniqueness should not be able. Diana's expression has become somewhat perplexed. Her understanding of uniqueness was limited, but she still knew that uniqueness should not behave in that manner unless someone is behind it or there is a problem with the uniqueness. There is, in fact, a problem with uniqueness. Aukas's confirmed it, as if he could see right through her mind. Aukas's confirmed a lot of things, and the eye is linked to hermit uniqueness. However, it has not yet evolved into what it will be like in the future. The uniqueness seemed to be in a strange state, it couldn't be considered living, but it also has some weak consciousness in it. After seeing that eye, he knows that hidden sage will be born soon. But, the situation should be still somewhat salvageable. Diana, on the other hand, was experiencing a great deal of emotional turmoil when she heard her lord's confirmation. After all, she was an angel of the hermit pathway, this situation was bound to affect her again, and she couldn't always rely on her lord to save her. You don't need to be concerned. After seeing her worried expression, Aukas's said. Diana pressed her worried heart after hearing his reassurance, and in her mind, she was also planning a way to deal with the situation. Would you like to accompany me? Aukas's asked abruptly, as he stood up from his seat. Of course, Diana says, while she pushed her worries and thoughts to the back of her mind. And, her face became a little excited. Her lord will not simply ask her to accompany him without a reason. When she accompanied him before, she had a bountiful harvest. Take my hand. Aukas's extended his hand to her, she immediately complied. My lord, where are we going? Diana finally asked after she had calmed down. We are going to meet the famed artisan and then pay a visit to the Mosaic ascetic order. As he spoke, Aukas's smiled. He then turned around and looked Diana in the eyes. After all, they must pay for what occurred here. He stated rather calmly. Aukas's then chuckled as he looked at Diana, who was too shocked and terrified to speak. Their figures became illusory and vanished from the tower, and with their departure, the frozen reality under his order was restored. Chapter 10, Artisan. As the golden sun rose in between the range of mountains, the light of dawn glazed out the horizon. Under this light, the night sky faded, giving way to day. The light shone on two figures standing on the mountain's crest. One of the figures was a woman with Caucasian skin and a sharp nose. Her hair was long and black, almost reaching her hips, and her eyes were sapphire blue. The black-haired lady wore traditional blue robes embroidered with stars. The woman was now standing on the crest of a snowy mountain, her eyes wide, as if she was astonished by what she was seeing. Next to her was a man with short white hair that was slightly messy and a golden iris that glowed and surged like the blazing sun in the sky. He had a chiseled jaw and thin lips. He was dressed in a black suit and held a brown book in his hand. The man was also looking at the scene before him, but he was calmer than the woman standing next to him. They were, of course, Aukas's and Diana. Diana couldn't believe what she was seeing, it truly shook her to her core because what she was seeing was too incredible and magnificent. There was a floating continent in front of her. Yes, a continent that was floating directly before her, visible through the clouds. What was more astonishing was its size, which was nearly a quarter of the northern continent. She had never seen anything like it before, and even she, who had witnessed godly miracles, was truly taken aback by the floating continent. As for how such a massive continent could exist without affecting the rest of the world, she only felt that the space here was slightly different, so she inferred that some changes had been made to space in the surroundings. Come on, you are this surprised by just seeing this? Aukas's chuckled, as he turned and looked at her shocked face. We haven't even gotten to the center of the floating continent. Is this the home of Artisan, my lord? Diana finally got back to her senses, and asked after slight excitement. She was taken aback when her lord said that they would go to Mosaic ascetic order to avenge what had happened to her. She hadn't expected her lord to be so concerned about her. It just made her feel strange. Don't get her wrong, she didn't have any feelings for her lord, she isn't become that stupid yet. And now she's standing in front of a floating continent, where she'll most likely meet the Artisan himself. She felt a rush of excitement and utter confusion in her heart, as Artisan was her childhood idol. She even discovered her passion at his exhibition, but she never had the opportunity to meet him. Concerning the confusion, she didn't understand why her lord had brought her here rather than to the Mosaic ascetic order, where the uniqueness was most likely to be present. It certainly is. Aukas's nodded and motioned for her to take his hands. Come on, we don't have much time. Diana grabbed his hand and felt the world before her spin for a moment before returning to normal. She turned and looked around, realizing she was in a large room, but her attention was drawn to the scene outside the window before she could see any further. Outside the window, there were numerous skyscrapers with strange architecture, as well as many people flying around the city in unusual vehicles that were gliding through the sky. She also looked around, and managed to find various people conducting research on strange inventions. Diana stared, mouth agape, at everything. I wasn't expecting a guest. A deep voice drew her attention back, as she turned and looked at the source of the voice. A man stood in front of them, holding a bronze scroll in his hand. He had brown hair and black eyes. He rather had a high nose and was dressed in a grey robe. The man fixed his gaze on Diana for a brief moment, causing her body to stiffen. The excitement she had felt when she finally saw her idol before was swept away as she met those indifferent eyes. For, she had the impression that she had been completely exposed, with all of her secrets laid bare for him to see. Her body relaxed and the sensation vanished as soon as a hand was placed on her shoulder. When she turned around, her lord was standing beside her, his hand on her shoulders. Yet, a friend at that. The man smiled amicably, as he turned to face Aukas's, who was standing next to Diana. Aukas's looked at the Artisan, who was behaving friendly, as if he had no idea why he'd come here. He had previously met Artisan and had a number of run-ins with each other. During the Third Epoch, Artisan was very famous because his talent triumphed most. One can see it clearly, by just looking at the floating continent and the city that was so out of era, that he managed to build. Artisan even managed to gain the guidance of the ancient sun god himself, which pushed him one step closer to becoming a god. Since he learned a great deal from ancient sun god. This was also the time when they became acquainted. Shall we cut the nonsense? The cold tone of Aukas's caused the temperature in the room to rise. Aukas's had enough of this, for didn't have the patience or time to play along with Artisan. His words made Artisan's smile stiffen, and Diana was attempting to make blend in with his surroundings, as she sensed the atmosphere between them was way off. Aukas's began walking towards Artisan as a divine aura erupted from him, filling the room with golden flames. The room in which Aukas's was present was anything but ordinary, as it contained valuable notes and calculations that the Artisan had painstakingly written. It had inventions with enough power to put most future sealed artifacts to shame. There was also endless books on the various shelves that held knowledge that delved into esoteric concepts such as cosmos, time, and space. While, the room was also filled with restrictions and powerful defense, to the point where even an archangel would be powerless if caught in it. Even so, everything went up in golden flames. The flames kept burning it all and illuminating the center of the room which was unaffected by the flames. What gives you such confidence? Artisan smiled as he spoke, and his piercing eyes locked on Artisan. Despite everything that has happened, you are here with such calmness even when facing me. Let me guess. Aukas's smile widened, and he continued without giving Artisan a chance to reply or react. Is it because of Adam? Chapter 11, Paragon. The golden flames swirled around the room's center, illuminating the figures inside. The temperature of the flames affected literally everything, to the point where reality itself was melting, as if it were a candle in the fire. Artisan stared at the golden flames that were consuming all of his hard work. He only felt regret and pain. He had no idea where it all went wrong because he had a perfect plan and a well-thought-out path for his bright future. Nonetheless, everything collapsed in front of his eyes. He didn't know how much of this was due to his own arrogance or self-confidence, for he used to believe that nothing could go wrong and that no one could stop his ascension. Looking back, Artisan's lips turned upwards as he smiled self-deprecatingly at his previous self. He is now facing the terrible consequences of his actions. 4. It's truly terrifying to face an angry god. Artisan was aware that he was treading on thin ice, and the god's gaze put enormous strain on his body and soul. Before, when confronted with Occuses, he manages to keep his composure. As he remembered a priest who always prayed to a figure in a cross, he had some hope left in his heart. Adam was his last hope. 4. He was a member of Twilight Hermit Order before, and he also personally met Adam after everything happened and explained it all, as the situation was already out of his hands. In response, Adam simply smiled and assured him that everything would be fine. Even Adam was generous enough to promise to lend a hand if the situation worsened. However, at the time, even Artisan did not anticipate that things would escalate to the point where he would attract the wrath of God. When he heard Occuses mention Adam now, his calm expression finally gave way to despair. It wasn't because Occuses discovered his backer was Adam, but Ocuses's expression and look remained unchanged even after learning that. Oh! Occuses was amused by Artisan's changing expression. What do you expect? Do you think I'd back down and talk to you politely? He spoke mockingly, revealing Artisan's thoughts, as if he could see right through him. Adam, the angel of imagination, king of angels of the visionary pathway, creator's son, the zealot, the list of titles given to him is endless. Occuses understood why Artisan had such faith in Adam, because Adam had performed such feats that many did not consider him to be a king of angels, but rather a god. Occuses remembers that fateful day when chaos and depravity engulfed the planet once more, as the creator's blood spilled across the ocean. The golden sun in the sky dimmed as its finally twilight illuminated the entire world. The ancient sun god's resentment and negative emotions when he experienced the betrayal manifested in reality. As a result, cataclysm erupted all over the world. The eastern continent suffered the most because it was where the true creator was born. Then, the second blasphemy slate arose from the sea. The alliance between gods and king of angels quickly fell apart, and a war ensued between them over the ownership of the slate. However, the slate ended up in the hands of Adam, who appeared in the midst of the chaos and took the slate. Even when the gods attacked, he was unfazed, as a cathedral built from the bones of fallen ancient gods themselves, arose around him, protecting him and letting him escape the siege. It was truly a sight to behold. At the time, everyone who saw it knew Adam was far from simple. Occuses knew that his former self suspected that Adam was a failsafe left by the ancient sun god. If things went wrong, Adam was most likely tasked with resurrecting the creator. And his former self, and even other gods, were always wary of the angel of imagination, because they didn't know how much of the ancient sun god's legacy that he got, other than the bone cathedral. His former self would not have taken the risk in the situation. But he is no longer the same, as he is even prepared to face Adam, despite knowing who Adam really is. Occuses, on the other hand, had a feeling Adam wouldn't show up at all. Haven't you figured it out yet, Artisan? I never concealed my presence since I came to this floating continent, Occuses chuckled. I thought you were the smartest of them all, Artisan. Artisan's brown eyes dimmed as his last hope was extinguished at the exact moment he realized it. Despite his dire circumstances, the angel of imagination did not appear at all. Your Excellency. Finally, Artisan spoke up rather hoarsely, his face became respectful. I am willing to accept any conditions imposed on me because I have truly inconvenienced you. Conditions, hey? Occuses raised his brows, his expression playful, as he noticed Artisan's sudden shift in attitude. At least you've finally recognized the situation you're in now, Artisan. When Artisan heard this, he fell silent. However, his hands were clenched tightly together, and his body was slightly shaking, revealing his true emotions. Where should we begin? Occuses' smile eventually faded, giving way to apathy. How about you start with what happened in Mosaic ascetic order and problem of hermit's uniqueness? And don't ever try to be clever with me again. Caucasus stated coldly. Because you can't bear the consequences. He said this while pointing to the window. The golden sun, which was rising over the horizon, suddenly emitted a blazing light, which instantly illuminated the entire floating continent. All I have to do is snap my fingers. Caucasus stated flatly. Then the light of the sun will consume your anchors and the floating continent. He stated, as if he didn't give a damn about the countless people on the continent who will also be burned by the sun's rays. And with it, all your hard work and chances of becoming a god. The ritual for Sequence 0, Paragon is to construct a miracle of civilization that should be far ahead of the current era and drink the potion for advancement under the reveal of this miracle to the world. Chapter 12, The Plan of Artisan. The golden sun in the world's horizon shone brightly, which immediately drew the attention of everyone on the floating continent. The floating continent was enormous and looked no different from a natural paradise. It would not give a first impression that it was created artificially by someone. To be more specific, the continent was a miracle in and of itself because it contains a self-sustaining natural environment capable of supporting millions of people without difficulty. The continent can even travel safely into the astral world while protecting its inhabitants. The continent also had snowy mountain ranges that spread through it, as well as green prairies that ran alongside the mountains. Long rivers with numerous tributaries ran through this vast expanse of land. There were also other small floating islands near the continent that were linked together by brown bridges. One can see a massive waterfall on the continent's western edge, where the river eventually reached its end and fell into the northern continent. There was a beautiful and strange city in the middle of the continent, with a large number of villages and towns connected to it via a road from the city. Today, however, whether it is farmers working in the fields, craftsmen working in the capital city, or believers praying in the cathedral, everyone in their path came to a halt and gazed at the world's horizon. As they gazed, the golden sun's rays, which were always gentle and warm, giving life and light to everything in the world, changed suddenly under gasps of awe. The sun in the horizon suddenly turned white and emitted a blazing light. Many people closed their eyes in the glare of the sun, which shone across the entire continent. The high sequence beyonders under Artisan can clearly sense the sun's wrath, as their figure were also illuminated under the light of the sun. Many in the floating continent thought it was the end of the world and collapsed on the spot, because not everyone can withstand the apocalyptic scene before them. At the same time, various divine gazes were cast at this location, ranging from a divine kingdom in the Amantha Mountains to a cathedral made of bones in the ruins of a battle of gods. Despite seeing what was happening with the floating continent, none of the owners of divine gazes did anything. Here, even though the entire continent had descended into chaos, the interior of the tallest bronze tower in the heart of the capital city remained unaffected. Inside the room, the golden flames had been extinguished, leaving only black charred remains and ashes floating in the air. Caucasus sat in a white chair, while Diana stood behind him, who was dazed and shocked by everything that had transpired. Artisan stood in front of him, his head down and his hands clenched together. He knew everything was on the line now, and if he said one wrong word and dissatisfied the sun god before him, he could be certain that the sun's rays would completely burn all of his life's work to ashes right before his eyes. The powerlessness and malice of the god that he felt now made him understand the cruelty of this world once more. Even though everything had devolved into a total mess, there was still hope for him before. But it's also extinguishing, as he felt his anchors kept dwindling. However, he couldn't give up now, for he paid too much, and if he had such a weak will, he wouldn't have become an archangel. Artisan finally took a breather to calm his raging emotions and gazed at the sun god who sat before him, who also looking at him indifferently. Even though everything seemed to take a long time, it was only a few seconds. It all started with the plan I devised at the start of the fourth epoch. Artisan's expression and tone became unusually calm as he began to answer the sun god's question in detail. At the time I was successful promoted to archangel, I began seeking to ascend to the throne of God. That's when Adam approached me, as if sensing my predicament, and invited me to a meeting he was holding, implying I'd find my answers there. When Caucasus heard about the meeting, his brow furrowed. According to his knowledge, almost all of the angels and archangels who were promoted in this era attended this meeting. Solomon was also present at the meeting. Not to mention, 2 of those who attended became gods in the future, and 1 became king of angels of Door Pathway. Caucasus intuitively felt Adam's presence in almost every major event that affected the world during this time period. Adam. Caucasus felt pressure as he considered this. It was truly unfortunate to have such an adversary against him. His attention was drawn back as Artisan continued after a brief pause, during which Artisan frequently glanced at him, most likely to gauge his reaction, which was always indifferent on the surface. Artisan continued in low tone. I went to the meeting with many others and finally saw the God's path and the ritual for becoming God. But then I noticed something else in the slate that I hadn't expected. He came to a sudden halt, his gaze drawn to Diana. You may continue. Caucasus stated, as if comprehending his actions. There will be no problems, even if she learns the secrets. Artisan took a deep breath and gazed at Diana deeply, certain that she was the one who had been trying to divine into this matter before and was most likely the reason he was facing the Caucasus now. Diana finally awoke from her stupor and began paying close attention. She pressed all the shock and questions in her heart and focused clearly, because her intuition as a sage made her believe that the next information revealed by her idol would forever change her fate and future. The second blasphemy state revealed something unexpected to me, the path to becoming a being above the gods, or more precisely, above the sequence. The Demon of Knowledge, which consisted the pathway of Hermit and Paragon, was the title above the sequence. Artisan spoke as he averted his gaze from Diana. It also made understand a lot about our world and the law of beyonder characteristics. Before I could process what I had learned, Adam approached me alone after the end of the meeting and explained the future and threat of outer gods beyond the barrier. When Caucasus heard that, his expression became strange. Artisan chuckled and said with a self-deprecating smile as he noticed this. I'm not sure if Adam intended for it to happen or if it was pure coincidence. But it didn't matter much anymore. Here I was, knowing the terrible future, and my desire to become stronger was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. So I devised a strategy to make my ascension much easier. I already had a knowledge emperor characteristics with me. So, using that, I created an artificial life that I could control, with the intention of using it as a tool to gather hermit characteristics and even uniqueness. I then desired to ascend to become the god of the Paragon pathway and secure my position. Then, in the future, I planned to absorb it and successfully become the dual pathway god, without having to worry about corruption and loss of control. In the silent room, Artisan's words echoed. Chapter 13, The Black Door. It would be a lie to say that Artisan's bold proposal did not surprise Caucasus. Moreover, this plan actually had a potential of success. Because he was aware of something similar happening in the future, during Amun's apotheosis, where Amun absorbed the characteristics and uniqueness of the door pathway from Bethel Abraham while replacing him. Only because Bethel gave up, understanding the threat posed by the mother goddess of depravity, who is using him as an anchor to open the door and bypass the barrier, was the entire ordeal possible at the first place. Artisan, on the other hand, didn't have to worry about this because the artificial life he created would most likely obey him. However, Caucasus can almost guess what happened next based on Artisan's expression. Diana, who was standing next to Caucasus, was in a daze again, as she processed the information she had received. Outer God's demon of knowledge above the sequence, these words kept repeating in her mind, because this information was too great and impactful for her. She had no idea there was a higher level above the gods. What exactly are outer gods? When her idol mentioned that term, she could clearly see fear in her idol's eyes. The presence of outer gods is known only to the gods and kings of angels, as it was not known among angels during this period. Wait. Diana's thoughts turned quickly as she began to analyze. The conflict between the Lord, the God of wisdom and knowledge and Lord of storms. There are also ongoing battle between Evernight Goddess, God of combat, and death. The Sun, Tyrant, White Tower, Hanged Man, visionary pathways are adjacent, as are the Death, Darkness, and Twilight pathways. So, the reason for the conflicts between gods, is that they are fighting for a chance to ascend above the sequence. Diana felt more clear than ever before, as all the doubts and puzzles she didn't understand before became clearer as she analyzed the truth. How about the ancient sun god? Did he manage to reach above the sequence? Diana's memories of that era were as clear as day, where the ancient sun god was said by some of his believers to be above all the gods themselves. She didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, she realized it wasn't as simple as she thought. How did the Lord betray and survive? More importantly, how did ancient sun god die? According to her knowledge, the information and secrets of that time were completely concealed, and even her Lord never spoke about what really happened on the battlefield. Diana's thoughts then turned to the plan mentioned by Artisan. Now, when Artisan had noticed that the sun god in front of him had not spoken up, he continued on with a somewhat dejected tone. And then it happened. I was working on a new project one day. That was when I discovered anomalies in the artificial life I created. Before I could clearly see what was going on, it completely escaped my control, and it managed to escape even with the restriction, and my powers couldn't hold it all. I really didn't expect Hidden Sage was created by Artisan. Arcus's thought, slightly surprised. To be honest, he didn't expect this kind of advancement. Even though he knew Artisan had to be involved, it now appears that Artisan is the main culprit behind this entire incident. The Hidden Sage is the most likely the artificial life that escaped Artisan's control. This entire situation. The more Arcus's thought about the situation, he felt the entire situation has a huge problem. Is it possible? Arcus's thoughts came to a halt as he remembered Adam and Klein's conversation in the future. If this involves that, then this entire situation will probably give huge headache for me. I had no idea what had caused this. The power of the artificial life that I created had suddenly increased out of nowhere, then it completely escaped out of my continent. Artisan continued, with his head down, facing the floor. Even though it managed to flee, I still felt my connection to it and managed to track it down to the Moses Ascetic Order's headquarters. Then, just as I was about to enter the Mosaic Ascetic Order, something happened. I felt the connection with it cut off, and I also felt its consciousness fade away, as if it had died, just before it was severed. I also assumed as much. However, how could I have been so wrong at the time? Artisan's countenance was twisted, and his voice became distorted. Arcus didn't show any surprise by the Artisan's sudden change, but his golden eyes gleamed as his gaze swept Artisan. Diana, on the other hand, was taken aback by this, as she sensed her idol's aura change at the instant he began speaking about the Moses Ascetic Order. But, I still entered to check. When I finally managed to make my way to the main area, though, I discovered something utterly unexpected. It was there, a being formed of pure information constituted of light, and in it was a purple book with an eye in the middle, slowly fading and integrating into it. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. The artificial life I built was absorbing the uniqueness of the hermit pathway on its own, right before my eyes at such a fast rate, so much so, I calculated it wouldn't take more than a week or two to finish. Then, obviously, I intended to stop it, but I came to a halt in my tracks when something appeared directly behind it, as if sensing my intention. In the empty room, the Artisan's low, distorted voice resonated. Diana, who was listening, had a shiver go down her spine and her eyes widened in sheer shock as she realized the reality around her were fading away into oblivion and a phantom of a black door appeared behind Artisan. As she stared at the black door, she had a terrible feeling that if her idol kept talking, something cataclysmic would happen. The horrible feeling pressured her body and spirit, as she began trembling and sweating as a result. She instantly turned to face her lord, who was likewise staring at the door with a solemn and grave expression that she had never seen before on her lord. Diana wanted to speak out right away to stop Artisan from continuing to speak, and she almost did, but she was stopped by Arcus's severe glare. Artisan went on as if he wasn't aware of anything unusual going on around him. It was a door that resembling a black stone tablet. There was mural on the door that drew my attention almost immediately. It portrayed an inverted tree. As Artisan divulged the knowledge of the door more and more, the phantom of the black door became increasingly vivid, as if it were going to fully appear in reality. There were 9 branches on the inverted tree. Enough. Arcus finally spoke up, rising to his feet and approaching Artisan in an instant. Arcus pressed his index finger against Artisan's glabella before he could react. He declared before the black door could fully emerge. Light. A blinding light exploded from the contact, engulfing Artisan and the forming black door behind him. Artisan eventually awoke from his weird condition beneath the glare of the unending light, as the black door behind him faded away. The knowledge more. As he glanced at the fading black door with a sigh, Arcus thought. Just when I thought things couldn't get much worse. Chapter 14, Sephirot. Knowledge more, the Sephirot required to become Demon of Knowledge, which has been sealed by Celestial Worthy in the Western continent. As he recalled this, Arcus retracted his finger from the Artisan, his brows wrinkled, as he felt this incident was becoming more complicated and dangerous. As it involved Sephirot, which can put even gods in grave danger. Such as the one in Cauldron City of the Spirit Word, even gods who try to reach the dark river flowing forth there will almost certainly perish. But, the things can still be salvageable, if the influence of the knowledge more is not as much as the river of eternal darkness, and it could have just managed to extend some of its power through the seal. Meanwhile, an entire tributary of river of eternal darkness has already flown out the seal, which is why even the gods didn't dare to visit that place. Osysis glanced at an artisan who didn't have any pollution or mutation with him, despite what had happened in the Moses ascetic order. So, he felt his guess is most likely true. If the knowledge more had sufficient influence over reality, Artisan would not be alive now, telling him of this event. What happened to me? Artisan questioned, his face turning pale, as his brown eyes wide with terror. The wavering figure of the artisan came to a halt as his face revealed a look of realization. How did I forget about that black door before, that door with that mural which appeared behind the artificial life, it is what responsible for everything. Artisan continued to murmur to himself, fully ignoring the sun god in front of him. Osis's attention was drawn back as he looked at the man in front of him, who appeared to be going insane. As he gazed at this, Osis rubbed his temples in a headache. Despite so, he managed to maintain his resolve not to act violently and waved his hands at him. Artisan calmed down as a white light appeared in the room and covered his figure. So, how did you manage to get out from there? Osis cut to the chase immediately. Artisan took a breather, and because that event had been so traumatic for him, for he had completely forgotten about the door until before, even he had only described the artificial life that he had built when meeting Adam. He knew something influenced him all this time, most likely it should be the black door. Even he didn't notice until now, and this fact filled him with dread, because he was king of angels, a being only a step below gods, and yet something like this happened to him. When I spotted that door, I came to a standstill. I'm not sure what got into me at the time, but when I saw the door, every fiber of my being felt threatened, and I had only one thought, to run away. Artisan responded swiftly, noticing the sun god's countenance deteriorating. I didn't even think twice about it, despite knowing what was going on, I escaped from there without a second thought. Artisan was well aware that the situation seemed absurd and odd, yet that is exactly what occurred. He had a hunch as to what that door might be, even though, it should impossible because it should have been in a seal. However, he really couldn't conceive of anything else that might have such a powerful effect on him, which could be somewhat related to the door. Artisan could definitely tell that the sun god was not in a good mood, after hearing his words, which only strengthened his suspicions. Even though he desperately wanted to ask the sun god, he refrained since he remembered what had happened previously and he didn't imagine what would happen if he said its name. It's enough. Osis waved his hands to stop him from speaking any further, since he is now very certain his prior assumption is true. However, knowing this, Osis had some reservations about going there. It's because the Sephiroths are all beyond human comprehension, especially the authority they represent, which is far too abstract. There could be a number of factors that there put him in risk. However, Osis's lips formed a wry smile as he suddenly thought of his future tragic fate. His hesitation faded as he realized that if he wanted to survive and become the God Almighty, he would have to do even more risky and crazy things. And if he wanted to win in the end, he would also need allies who would not betray him at every turn. As he turned to see Diana standing behind him, Hermit Osis finally decided his first crazy plan. Yes, he really wanted to help Diana ascend to become the Hermit. Take this, Diana. Osis turned to Diana and handed her a letter that appeared out of nowhere. And pass it on to Umbella, Earth Mother, in the Kingdom of Hail. When Diana heard her lord, she was shaken out of her reverie. Then she instinctively took a letter and hesitantly inquired. But, my lord, but... She was well aware that her lord was about to send her away. There are no more buts, Diana. Yes, I am sending you away, since the next event is not something an angel can take part in. The letter is also extremely critical, personally deliver it to Umbella. Osis interrupted her. Yes, my lord. Despite some reluctance in her heart, Diana finally nodded. Diana's figure collapsed into numerous golden light particles that fell into the ground and vanished swiftly as Osis tapped her forehead with his index finger. So, shall we leave? Osis eventually turned to face his artisan, who stood silently in front of him. Your Excellency, where are we going? Artisan inquired with trepidation, as hearing the sun god's invitation gave him a bad feeling. However, he didn't dare refuse. Obviously, to Moses' ascetic dawn. Osis grinned. How can I leave you out of it, Artisan, since it's your mess? Osis didn't give Artisan much time to react, as he seized his hand and both of their figures collapsed into golden particles of light in the room, which vanished quickly. As the light that flashed across the floating continent faded, the scorching sun visible through the window dimmed and reverted to normal, with their departure. underscore 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 underscore. At the same time, in the Sea of Ruins, Sonia C. In a cathedral, a golden-haired man was praying before a massive cross. The man wore simple white cloak and had a silver cross around his neck. The cathedral where the man prayed was anything but ordinary, with the bones of several mythical races embedded in the surface of each column, arch, and dome. Adam! Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the entire cathedral, filled with rage and madness. It sounded as if the person who spoke had nothing but hatred for the man praying inside. A blue lightning bolt descended from the void into the cathedral, causing fissures in very reality and heading directly for the man who was praying. Adam didn't open his eyes or move, he continued to pray. His posture was solemn, as if he were a priest who, no matter what, will not stop praying to his God until he finishes it. However, the lightning, which could easily kill angels, came to a halt in its path, as if trapped by an unknown force, and then vanished before it could reach the man praying. "You're truly a zealot." With a sigh, a leisurely voice sounded, a striking contrast to the previous fury. "Those angels who spend their days singing praises to their gods will be ashamed if they see your devotion." A young man appeared in the cathedral, out a starlight door. He had black curly hair and black eyes. His forehead was rather bored contrast to his thin face. What was most noticeable about him, however, was a crystal monocle he wore over his right eye, which glistened with light. Angel of Time, Amen. Chapter 15, Adam. Adam turned to face Amen after opening his golden eyes and rising from his praying stance. "What brings you here, Amen?" Adam asked, his limpid eyes locked on Amen, ignoring Amen's previous words and actions. "Why must you be so boring all of the time, brother?" Amen replied with a smile as he adjusted his monocle. "I recall you smiling and being so pleased in Medici's hands." He spoke about the past with a nostalgic face. "Take a look at you now, Adam, you've changed a lot." Amen's smile disappeared, his monocle glistened, and his keen stare was fixed on Adam's figure, as if trying to see through his brother's mysteries. "Isn't change a fascinating concept?" Adam remarked, his countenance unaffected by his brother's piercing gaze. "In this world, expect change, nothing is permanent." "Shouldn't you, Amen, know more about this than I do?" Adam asked quietly. "Since you vanished when our father died and reappeared near the end of the warring era. You didn't appear to have changed, but I could tell you were wearing a mask and." "That's enough." Amen interrupted while his expression became indifferent and he didn't show any anger at being exposed. "As expected of you, zealous brother. The subtle manipulation is constantly present even while conversing with others, entirely guiding it in the direction you want." Amen began walking around the church while speaking, eventually coming to a stand in front of the grey slate on the table near the cathedral's edge. "Keep your secrets to yourself, then." "Brother, I'm not going to pry any further." Amen spoke dismissively without waiting for Adam's response. "For, it would mostly be nothing but mundane." Adam was silent, his limpid gaze still fixed on Amen. "What happened with the floating continent?" When Amen realized this, he didn't pursue it any further and instead asked the inquiry for which he had come here in the first place. "Why did Osses invade it?" Much to surprise of Amen, Adam responded without any concealment. "There was a problem with the hermit's uniqueness." "What's the problem?" Amen pressed, feeling that the story behind the matter would be interesting to hear. Adam approached Amen and pointed to the words carved into a stone slab nearby. It was a grey stone slab. There were numerous mottled marks on its surface, giving it an ancient appearance. It also contained terms that appeared to be the origin of all languages. They were inscribed with sequence and potion formula names. Demon of Knowledge, Aracana of Madness, Knowledge More and the Hermit Uniqueness and Paragon Uniqueness +1 Knowledge Emperor Beyonder Characteristic +1 Illuminator Beyonder Characteristic. Adam pointed his index finger right at the name of Knowledge More. "So, Sephiroth." As he saw this, Amen's brows furrowed. "That's the second that managed to bypass the seal. It won't be the last." Adam stated calmly. "It's to be expected. As time passes, the original will begins to weaken." As his monocle gleamed, Amen spoke. "It wouldn't surprise me if the previous Lord of Mystery's seal starts weakening as well. However, how did this affect uniqueness?" Amen inquired, his gaze fixated on Adam and a smile on his lips. "I am not omniscient, Amen." Adam was unfazed by Amen's repeated attempts to test him. "Not even the gods can pry into it, let alone me." Amen laughed. Sorry about that, you often give off that impression, like you know everything, very much like our father. As a depressing atmosphere descended between two sons of the Creator, he implied something. Father always said he made me in his image and gave me some of his powers, so it's only natural that you get that impression. Adam reasoned rationally and carried on as if nothing had transpired. However, based on the recount that Artisan provided me, I can guess what happened. I am all ears, Amen said nonchalantly after gazing at Adam deeply. After I shared the information regarding the above the sequence with Artian, he managed to devise a plan. Adam described the whole plan of Artisan. Artisan has lived up to his name. As he heard Artisan's plan, Amen sighed. This is an incredible plan. His eyes soon become thoughtful, as if he's thinking about something. It managed to get away from the Artisan's control, which is most likely the work of the Sephirot. Adam continued in a warm tone. Then it completely ruined the Moses asectic order, there isn't much left there anymore. It's currently combining with hermit uniqueness, as we speak. It would have most likely succeeded, but not anymore. When Adam mentioned this, his warm tone changed. Are you certain? Amen was actually taken aback. I didn't expect you to have such belief in Osiris. The Sephirot power that has been extended into reality is most likely very feeble in comparison to its genuine power, as the Sephirot could do a lot more if it were otherwise. Adam stated this calmly. Osiris can handle it if he has assistance, that is. Is that why didn't save Artisan from Osiris? Amen inquired, smiling, as he reasoned after hearing Adam's words. More importantly, how did Osiris notice this? Artisan is not in any real danger. As he said, Adam shook his head. And an actual Beyonder ascending to become the hermit is preferable than a puppet created by Serphoid. As, things will become more difficult in the future. Then he explained what had occurred to Diana. I had no idea the gods now cared for their angels. Amen chuckled. It's interesting that, unlike Leodro and Hirabergen, he didn't develop paranoia against his own. Amen, everyone is different. Adam advised in a gentle voice, for which Amen just smiled. So, you're just going to let uniqueness fall into the hands of Osiris? Amen then asked, as if he hadn't considered the power disparity between them. Given what's happened, I wouldn't be surprised if Osiris gives his angel the uniqueness. Hermit must be born, one way or another. Adam said this without expressing his opinion. Hermit, hey. While stating this, Amen's expression became more intriguing. It appears that the future will not be so dull anymore. When he spotted Adam evading his questions once more, he didn't bother, and he also got the information he needed. Well, my zealous brother, I shall take my leave, Amen said with smile, as Starlight door appeared behind him. For, I can't stand your pretense anymore. He didn't wait for Adam's reaction before opening and entering the door, which vanished with his departure. Adam didn't show much change, as he took the blasphemy slate in his hand. But, all of a sudden, Adam came to a halt and turned to look in the direction of Solomon Empire, his clear golden eyes shining brightly. The empire shall fall. In the Bone Cathedral, his deep voice echoed. Chapter 16, Lilith. The golden sun shone through the clouds, illuminating the two figures standing on the large sand dune. A stony mountain range stood in front of them, with a pathway leading between two mountain peaks at its edge to a location illuminated by sunlight. Your Excellency, this is Moses' ascetic dawn. Artisan pointed to the pathway, where there was an array of buildings and statues at the end. I know. Osiris said this while frequently checking his pocket watch and his surroundings, as if he was waiting for something. Artisan sighed as he realized the sun god had ignored him again, he already resigned to his fate. Because he can't do much or escape under the gaze of a god. He can only hope that he will be able to keep his life, which seems like a luxury at this point given the situation he has found himself in. However, something drew Artisan's attention away, and his gaze was quickly drawn to something unusual in front of him. A small plant sprouted from the dry desert sand. It didn't end there, as more and more plants started growing from the sand dunes around him, as far as the Artisan's eyes could see. The vast expanse of sand dunes quickly turned into green prairies with brightly colored flowers blooming in it. One can even see butterflies and large animals appear out of nowhere and begin roaming around the green prairies, as if this is their home. The vibrancy here surprised Artisan because he could see a lot more, as the life force present in some of the life forms in this place rivaled demigods. While Osiris stood there calmly watching everything, as if he expected it. A divine woman appeared, dressed in a long white gown with short sleeves embroidered with drawings of various herbs and plants, as well as descriptions of various animals. She had silver hair that reached her hips and a half-moon symbol on her brow. Her face had soft features, a high nose, and plump red lips. Her beautiful red eyes gleamed as her gaze fell on Ossis's. With the appearance of the divine woman, the green prairies mutated further, as trees began to appear and started growing to tens of meters tall, and the plants were already the size of people. She also had a motherly aura that made everyone around her feel as if she was the mother of all life in existence. The divine woman's beauty stood out the most. Ossis's looked at this divine woman in a daze, for she was truly the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in both of his lives. No matter how many times he meets her, she always surprises him. For him, her beauty could no longer be described in words, rather, her very existence is an interpretation of the word beauty. Lilith, Earth Mother. Artisan did not dare to look deeply at Earth Mother, as the Sun God had done before him, for fear of offending another god. He was also taken aback by her presence here, who should been called by the Sun God to deal with the situation together. This also completely confirmed his previous suspicions. The realm of gods. As he gazed at the primeval forest that sprouted up due to just a descent of a god, Artisan intuitively felt the difference in power. He couldn't even imagine how it would look if Earth Mother asserted her authority. It's been a while, Ossis's. Lilith spoke in a gentle tone. You've changed a lot since then. She said this while gazing at the Ossis's vibrant golden eyes with her calm and tranquil red eyes. Everyone will change with time, Umbella. Ossis's responded with a smile on his lips. In this world, nothing is static or eternal. Yes, he did call Lilith for assistance, as the allies he now had leaned somewhat toward the Earth Mother and God of Combat. The reason he called Lilith instead of the God of Combat is because Lilith was a god of the Mother pathway, which is not adjacent to any of the gods' current pathways. As a result, she has always maintained a neutral relationship with all the gods, and she will be the only one who is likely to accept his call for assistance, as God of Combat will not be able to come, for Ossis's heard the conflict between Evernight and him had reached a boiling point. Also, Ossis's had no idea Lilith was still alive before and she had even managed to become a god in the disguise of another. He had known Earth Mother since the Third Epoch, and she had even been a member of Rose Redemption. Even though the members of Rose Redemption were brought together by the ancient Sun God, they got to know each other pretty well in the process. Nonetheless, Lilith was never discovered, even when she was surrounded by gods and kings of angels, each with their own authority over abstract domains. Ossis's believed that whatever authority was used was truly extraordinary, because it couldn't be simple concealment by Amon-Ines. As described in the original story, Amon-Ines' concealment may appear somewhat overpowered, but for gods, her concealment is not that effective. It could only be attributed to ancient Sun God. Finally, Ossis's reasoned, only the power of the ancient Sun God could truly accomplish this. He didn't bother revealing it because it would not bring any benefit to him. That is true. Lilith said with a gentle smile and continued on. I was also surprised when I received your letter. As you mentioned, this situation involves a Surfoid. Lilith's expression became solemn. Why should I assist you in this? Even knowing that it could endanger my life. She said, her brow furrowed. Of course, she isn't going to assist him for free. Lilith didn't expect him to ask for her help, but she didn't reject him outright when she saw the letters only told her of the situation and nothing else and came here out of courtesy for another god. An alliance. Ossis's prospered immediately after hearing her, because he was already prepared for this situation. In the future, Umbella, you won't be able to maintain your neutrality. You must choose a side one way or the other. Indeed. Lilith nodded, as she was aware of the situation. But why should I form one with you rather than Leodro or Hirabergen? Even though she knew the relationship between gods, she still questioned because she wanted to hear out Ossis's. You should be aware that Hirabergen has most likely formed an alliance with Amon-Ines. Said Ossis's while, Amon-Ines is holding the uniqueness of Moon Pathway, and your son is already at war with her. You're going to have to face her one way or another, Umbella. Ossis's went on, as if he was unaware of Lilith and Amonis's relationship. You'd have no chance against her if you fought alone. But my authority effectively restrains hers. As for Leodro, you're aware of his history with Amon-Isis. Ossis's expression lightened as he remembered what happened during Leodro's apotheosis. So, there aren't many options for you, Umbella. Ossis's finished with his eyes narrowed. Lilith was deafeningly quiet for a moment before nodding. I agree, after we've resolved the issues here, we'll talk more about it. Her agreement does not surprise Ossises. Despite the fact that she and Amon-Ines should have a relationship, they should still act when they are apart. Concerns about Lilith who could leak his information to Amon-Ines during the war. However, Ossises had already had a plan for this situation. You should be the famous artisan. Lilith's gaze was drawn to a brown-haired man standing next to Ossises, who was attempting to reduce his presence in front of two gods. Your floating continent is truly miraculous, she complimented him. Thank you, milady. Artisan accepted her compliment, it at least lifted his spirits, as it was the only good thing that had happened to him today. You appeared to be in good shape now. Lilith spoke with a playful expression, causing the artisan's heart to sink and his eyes to flash with fear. Look at what you've done to him. When Lilith noticed the fear in the eyes of the artisan, she said to Ossises with a chuckle, and Ossises just rolled his eyes. Don't be so worried, Ariston. Ossises isn't going to kill you, Lilith comforted, because if he had that notion, you wouldn't be standing here yet. Her soothing words finally made Artisan calm. Shall we get started? Lilith shifted her gaze to Ossises. This event, I have a feeling, will be more than just dangerous and fatal. We might even come across something unexpected. They began their journey to Moses' ascetic order with her words. Chapter 17, The Past. Three figures strolled along a long hallway, their footsteps echoing deafeningly in rather quiet corridor, as sunlight was streaming in from the long windows on both sides of the wall. There were cracks in the surrounding walls, debris, and damaged statues in the hallway. I'm talking about the artificial life you made. Can you tell me more about its soul? Lilith asked softly as her voice echoed in the corridor. Is there a difference between a natural soul and the artificial soul you gave it? She inquired with intrigue, knowing that the Paragon pathway, like hers, had the capacity to give life, which included soul creation. There is a distinction, milady. As Ossises walked before them, Artisan replied while strolling with Lilith. The soul is a living being's incorporeal, ethereal essence, it consists of emotions, character, feelings, consciousness, perception, thinking, and so on. However, even though an alchemist can grant a new soul to a non-living item, Artisan remarked solemnly, it is so far apart from the natural soul that it can only be described as an imitation. It was unable to perfectly emulate the natural soul. Artisan continued. It couldn't compare to your excellency's authority over a life, which should be able to build perfect life. Artisan always kept staring at Earth Mother while speaking, as if to gauge her reaction to what she was hearing. Can't you create it? Lilith questioned, her brows furrowed. You should have been able to figure something out as an illuminator. Sequence 1 Illuminator of Paragon Pathway, revolutionary innovation, they can easily create futuristic wonders beyond the scope of current world-era technologies such as nuclear fusion-based technology or giant mecha robots, Gundam. I did some research. Surprisingly, Artisan nodded. As a king of angels, my authority over knowledge and civilization is abstract, just like any other authority. My authority of knowledge is heavily reliant on one's perspective when attempting to comprehend reality. I tried to make a perfect soul but failed every time because I believed that a natural soul is something that one is born with rather than something that one can develop. But, when I attempted to look at it from a different angle, that a soul is a natural phenomena that arises when a species reaches a certain level of sentience. There was progress. Did you succeed? Lilith inquired, her interest piqued by the artisan's research. I did. With a slightly depressed tone, Artisan said. Did you use the Knowledge Emperor's characteristics for this? A deep voice inquired, prompting the artisan to gaze forward, only to see Ossises turn and gaze at him, while questioning. At the same time, Lilith shifted her attention on him, putting Artisan under pressure from the sight of two gods. Yes, even though my findings about perceptive was helpful, I was still unable to complete the final step, resulting in failure. This stage, I intuitively understood, could only be crossed once I had become the Paragon. Artisan said, his voice heavy. However, I knew there could be no faults in the plan I intended to accomplish, so I used it and succeeded, which is the artificial life I developed. You're quite daring, Artisan. After hearing this, Lilith expressed her opinion. Or, to put it another way, all those who seek knowledge in the world share the same feature. Despite the disaster later, it's still commendable that you found a way. As soon as he heard this, Artisan fell silent. But he has already come to terms with everything that has occurred previously. Ossises, on the other hand, remained silent on this and inquired about something else. What was the name of the angel who created this organization? He's called Stiano. Artisan responded. He was also present at that meeting with me and later went on to create this organization. Did you see him when you first arrived? Ocasas inquired. Your Excellency, no. After what transpired here, the entire Moses ascetic order was abandoned, and the survivors were relocated themselves to the continent's rim. Artisan responded. And, I didn't see him when I first came. After hearing this, the Ocasas didn't press any further. No one else here expects us in the entire place. Even the security measures around this place is entirely ineffective. While strolling along the corridor, Lilith said. At the very least, whomever was in charge here acted quickly after spotting it and ordered evacuation. Are you able to see everything here? Ocasas inquired, his face serious. There's one room in the middle that I couldn't see through. Lilith's face was also solemn. That is the main library of the Moses ascetic order, as well as the repository of the majority of information and knowledge. Artisan stated, as he already been here. The Sephiroth should be there, said Ocasas rather calmly. For not a lot can block our sights. As they walked into this place in silence, Lilith's expression was pretty heavy. Nobody spoke throughout this time. They finally entered a hall with massive pillars on both sides of the room supporting the enormous dome. Each pillar had symbol which depicted an eye within a triangle, as well as an open book beneath it. A brown door stood in front of them, closed, and the reality around it was blurry. The sun shined through the dome's glass canopy, which included representations of many historical legends. Ocasas turned and glanced at them for a moment, before speaking on the problem. I merely want to stress that the Sephiroth are beyond human comprehension, as are their abilities. The Sephoid authority is based on knowledge, which is a powerful and broad concept. The Sephiroth is most certainly aware of our presence. So, whatever the next move is, it will be highly dangerous. Because knowledge can be very lethal weapon. Ocasas spoke in a solemn tone. However, the power that has been extended here is meager in comparison to its true authority. But, there is still a high risk here. Finally, I'll use my authority of order to try to seal it, and Umbella, you'll help me and also deal with artificial life. For, during that time, the Sephoid will not sit back and watch. Lilith nodded, but her attention was always drawn to the brown door in front of them. However, Artisan. Ocasas said after a brief pause. If you could assist, then do so. As, this situation affects your future as well, because if the Hermit's uniqueness is permitted to be integrated, it will be far more difficult for you to become a god. Finally, try to survive. Ocasas said lightly, as Artisan heart sunk as he considered the words of the sun god. They then proceeded to the door and stood in front of it. I have a feeling that whatever we confront first will be absolutely unexpected. As she stared towards the door, Lilith said abruptly. Now that she was standing in front of the door, she was calm rather than being nervous. I certainly hope not. While placing his hands on the brown door, Ocasas stated sharply. Because the door lacked a handle or a lock, Ocasas just pushed it open. Creak. As the door slowly opened, the creaking sound resonated around the hall. Ocasas strode in without hesitation, followed by Lilith and Artisan who were close behind him. They were met with a great expanse of white space with seemingly no end to sight. Boom. Behind them, the door closed and vanished. However, before they could react, the reality of their surroundings shifted, showing a completely different landscape. Massive skyscrapers stood in ruins as far as the eye could see, some slanting, as if about to topple, and others upright with damage. There were broken bridges and a multitude of abandoned cars on the lanes, as well as some planes that appeared to have crashed into the ground. The sky was filled with gleaming stars that gleamed brighter than they had ever done before. Most importantly, there was a dazzling sliver moon in the sky, which brightly illuminated the night sky. Image here. This is indeed unexpected. As he stared at this, Ocasas had a melancholy look on his face. Chapter 18, Crimson Moon. The silver moon shone brightly in the night sky, and the stars twinkled, illuminating the ruins of a once prosperous civilization before them. Ocasas, Lilith, and Artisan stood on a dark road surrounded by abandoned cars, with street lamps and traffic still lights flickering with light. Even though the skyscrapers appeared to be damaged, there were no bodies of the dead or any sign of the chaos that should have ensued if a cataclysmic event occurred. Did they all vanish? Ocasas thought this with a heavy heart. He had no idea what happened during the apocalypse that wiped out modern civilization. If most just vanished, leaving some to fend for themselves, or if this was the work of some great old one. Even though it wasn't his world, it made him sad, but he quickly shifted his focus to their situation, rather than sulk in his emotions, as this was not the time. The past. I wasn't expecting the Sephiroth to project the past era, but on top of that, it just had to at this era. How did it manage to do this? Its strength should not be sufficient to accomplish this. As he considered this, Akas's emotions were like a roller coaster. Because this is not an ordinary time, the God Almighty, the Celestial Worthy, and the Mother Goddess of Depravity were all very active during this time. When Klein tried to divine the artifact of the ancient Sun God using the power of Sephiroth Castle, the ancient Sun God in the past noticed and cast his gaze at Klein in the future. Akas's remembered this exactly. This left a deep impression on him, because "We meet again, mysteries," Adam said when he met Klein during the fifth epoch. The ancient Sun God was only a half-pillar God Almighty at that time. I completely miscalculated. Akas's was filled with dread. Even though he had previously overestimated Sephiroth abilities, but looking now, he completely felt otherwise. The Silver Moon. Lilith looked through the strange buildings at the Silver Moon with wide eyes that were filled with genuine shock. Lilith was no stranger to the Silver Moon, as she was an ancient god of the second epoch, where remnants of the previous era could still be found. She had done some investigation into it. She had heard the legend of the Silver Moon and even read a description of it, which stated that the moon was once silver, signifying purity, and that it was not always crimson. However, with the apocalypse that brought the world to an end, the moon's silver moonlight had long since faded. Is this the forgotten epoch before the first epoch? Lilith examined the strange city and structures. She had seen similar ruins in the eastern continent at the start of the second epoch, but nothing compared to this. Her red eyes flashed with tumultuous emotions as Lilith's hands were tightly squeezed. It's been a long time since something had such an impact on her. It's because she's always been curious about her origin and past. Because her memories of the beyond the era of the second epoch are hazy, she has no idea what happened before. But she always had the impression that she was not born in the second epoch, but rather much earlier, in a time long forgotten by her and the rest of the world. Where are we? A loud voice drew the two gods from their chaotic thoughts and made them turn in unison to face Artisan. Artisan, on the other hand, didn't notice their change because he was looking at the old newspaper in his hand and examining the surroundings before turning to ask. Before, Artisan was taken aback by what he saw. The strange machinery and structures drew his attention right away. After studying what it was, his enthusiasm overtook his caution, and he wanted to learn more about it. He came across the newspaper on the ground at that point. Just seeing this gave him a déjà vu feeling, as newspapers were also available outside. He had the impression that these ruins must have some connection with their world. Even this place. Artisan had a thought as he remembered his scroll, which recorded the images of civilization up to the era of fire. He knew it was incomplete, but he couldn't find anything back before that time. However, this location might just have that origin, so he immediately inquired of the gods, who had lived much longer than he had. "Give me the newspaper," Akas's said, and didn't bother to answer the question of Artisan. The newspaper held by Artisan immediately drew the attention of the Akas's. After finally noticing the sun god's grave expression, Artisan handed the newspaper without asking any questions. Lilith approached Akas's and studied the newspaper with complexity. The New York Times, Sunday, May 23, 2020, New York. Oil leakage is widespread near major oil plants. The headlines were boldly written in English. "We're in New York." While looking up at the ruined city that was so unlike the one he had always wanted to visit, Akas's mused. "Are you able to interpret it?" After noticing he kept looking at the newspaper and the city, Lilith inquired. "I have seen this language before," Akas's stated. Simultaneously, he tried to calm his emotions, which had been on a roller coaster before, so he wouldn't expose himself like he had done now. Even if knowledge more projected something like this, it shouldn't possibly involve God Almighty and Celestial Worthy, so he calmed down from his previous findings, only by thinking like this. "We have seen this language before?" Artisan inquired urgently. "From the ancient sun god." After a brief pause, Akas's responded with a prepared excuse. "The words here are similar to the unknown language he used with us on occasion." But, he wasn't lying. During those days, the ancient sun god spoke and wrote in English on several occasions. "You mean?" Lilith's thoughts strayed to far-fetched conclusions. "It's possible that the ancient sun god she said while pointing to the ruins. He could have just known the language at the time, because he was almost omniscient and omnipotent. Arcas dismissed her guess without hesitation and looked at Lilith deeply, puzzled as to how she had arrived at this conclusion so correctly and easily. After hearing Arcas's words, Lilith remained silent and didn't ask any further questions. Despite the fact that her guess was based on nothing, she still believed it was most likely correct. Artisan was about to ask again when he noticed the two gods looking up at the sky in unison, as if something had captivated their attention. Artisan also noticed that the silver moonlight that illuminated the ruins was turning crimson, which caused him to raise his head as well. Artisan witnessed something he will remember for the rest of his life. The stars that gleamed dimmed and extinguished one after another, as the crimson light that was veil that draping the entire sky became visible to the naked eye. Boom! 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 The skyscrapers began to collapse one by one as a crimson sky appeared, and the entire environment began to change as blood began to seep out of the ground around the ruins. The bodies of various humanoids were floating on the surface of the blood river that soon formed, some of which seemed to have life, as their chests went up and down, as if they were breathing. As something was approaching the silver moon in the sky. Crack! Arcas punched at the reality without hesitation, his hands were covered in golden flames, and a crack appeared in the very reality. The crack grew larger and larger, as if reality were nothing more than a breakable mirror. And, before its appearance, the order of this reality began to collapse with his punch. Wither! A deep voice echoed as the rate of collapse increased exponentially, as reality began to wither visibly, turning the surroundings into likes of an abstract painting. Lilith also used her desolate authority to hasten the collapse of reality. But, just then everything came to a halt, the collapse and withering of reality vanished, as the authority of order and desolate was erased by an unknown power that appeared out of nowhere. Everything was restored by this mysterious force. Arcas looked up at the crimson sky, his face heavy and his eyes filled with dread, a wry smile on his lips. She noticed us. No, it's the other way, she had always known. With his words, the silver moon turned crimson and expanded to cover half of the sky. An indescribable being appeared next to the moon, obscuring the entire sky and casting a shadow over them. The being was several times the size of the moon. It had an endless number of bloody tentacles and eyes on them. From the crimson sky, all of its eyes turned and gazed at them. Underscore 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 underscore. At the same time, among the mountains. As twilight and night met in the sky above the northern continent, war horns were blown. As blood and flames covered the entire land, angels and saints entered the battlefield. Two kingdoms' banners swayed in the realm, one with a crimson moon symbol and the other with a twilight sun. Above it all, two gods battled it out, while twilight and darkness flickered across the sky in response to their actions. Clang! The reality between the clashes collapsed completely when a sword soaked in twilight met with a scythe shrouded in darkness. In the twilight, a massive mountain-like figure wielded the sword, wearing ragged silver armor and a helmet visor that only revealed one orange eye. In the darkness, an equally large figure held the scythe. She had a veil over her face and wore a black layered gown. It was studded with numerous brilliant lights that looked like stars in the night sky. As the scythe and sword separated from the clash, they moved in lockstep. However, something intervened in their war before they could continue. A crimson moon appeared in the sky obscured by night and dusk. The crimson moon shone brightly, its light illuminating the entire sky around the world. Its glow fully engulfed the night and the twilight. Chapter 19, Trap. The moon lit up the entire sky as its crimson hue deepened, finally turning blood red. The world was awakened by the blood moon, which caused many to glance up at this strange phenomenon that was visible all over the globe. A red sea flowed on the moon as it revolved around the earth. It was drowning everything, as though it was digesting this natural satellite. The crimson sea that flowed in the moon stopped as various eyes appeared on its surface when Arcas and others encountered it in the projection of past created by authority of knowledge of Sephiroth. Its gaze landed on the Moses ascetic order more accurately, directly at the main room, as countless eyes glanced at the blue planet behind the barrier. If one can look at the indescribable being without losing their minds, they will witness a reflection of Arcas, Lilith, and Artisan encircled by a blood ocean in its countless eyes. On Earth, as the massive giant's dusk receded to his own kingdom, the Evernight goddess and god of combat had long since ended their conflict. Amon Isis, the Evernight goddess, stood in the sky, lighted by crimson moonlight, silently staring at this. Her dark gown fluttered as she turned to face the massive crimson moon that was obscuring her view. She sensed the crimson moon's power seeping into reality, bypassing the barrier though an unknown anchor, a powerful authority beyond human comprehension, and exerting towards a location in the northern continent. Amon Isis also sensed the vibrancy of life all throughout the earth, which seemed to be celebrating their mother's return. The very earth trembled as endless filth and corruption in abyss moved in chaos, as though terrified by the moon's power. She can even hear Ferubadi's painful roar reverberating throughout the abyss and the oceans. The clouds in the sky vanished as the entire sky turned crimson, the crimson moonlight falling on earth like a veil from the moon. The degenerative darkness in the forbidden land of gods receded as the crimson moon lightened it up completely. She can see the crimson moonlight illuminating everything, for even the grey fog barrier was clearly visible to her. Now, Amon Isis, holding the scythe, stood in the crimson sky, her figure highlighted by the crimson light. Her tranquil eyes gazed at the blood moon, as a prophecy she read before her transmigration flashed across her mind. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Creator. Lilith, whispered Amon Isis as she stared down the Moses ascetic order's location. Her serene gaze eventually expressed some worry. After only a brief glance, she promptly turned back to face the red moon. Amon-Ina's countenance became solemn behind the veil that draped over her face, as she could see numerous eyes on the moon peering through the barrier at the earth. She didn't hesitate any longer and proclaimed solemnly in front of the entire world. Night. The crimson moonlight that had illuminated the entire planet had dimmed noticeably, with darkness spreading over the sky throughout the world in an attempt to prevent the blood moon's power from affecting the earth. An imaginary white tower and clouds filled with blue lightning arose in the sky shortly after, joining darkness in blocking off the blood moon's power. The crimson moonlight also shone through the sea of ruins, lighting up the bone cathedral. The Creator's son gazed up to see the blood moon through the cathedral's large window. As he gazed at the crimson sea in the moon, Adam's clear and limpid eyes finally changed. I really wasn't anticipating this. Adam's calm voice echoed in the church, as even he didn't think something like this could happen. Underscore 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 underscore. Akas's emotions was incomprehensible at the moment, as he couldn't decide whether he felt regret for coming here or terror at the prospect of encountering once pillar. Even though he knew he would have to confront them one day, he didn't think it would be any time soon. How does it feel to be starred by a once pillar? He can see her authority subconsciously influencing everything around him, so it wasn't obviously good. Space, reality, knowledge, time, and many other concepts have been corrupted by her, and have entirely fallen under her control and whim. Everything changed visibly as crimson eyes and tentacles appeared in the very space, and reality shifted to reveal a red world with flesh mountains and humanoids with no skin laying upon it, as well as a river of blood, where various twisted fetus and other abominations that seemed to be straight out of hell were floating upon. They would have immediately corrupted under her presence if it hadn't been for their level of life, reaching the level of God and King of Angels, for everything about them, whether fate, memories, life, and soul, would have been assimilated with her and become part of her, while they would have ceased to exist, if not for that. Akas's also sensed the authority of a pillar that influenced reality. He couldn't quite define it at first, because it was enormous and unlike anything he'd ever experienced. She appeared to be an aggregate of all the cosmos' negative powers, evil/yin. He was also struck by her boundless vitality, to the point where she appeared to be the originator of life in the universe, or, to put it another way, the mother of all life in cosmos. He felt pressure on his soul and body under her gaze, even as a true god, as a nigh infinite spiritual force crushed against their figure. Akas's figure trembled slightly as sweat beads formed on his forehead, but soon a sun symbol appeared on his forehead, brightening the surroundings and protecting him and others from her great spiritual strength. Akas's saw that her eyes were entirely fixed on Lilith, who dropped to the ground with crimson blood pouring from her mouth, nose, and eyes. No. Akas's immediately realized what her actual objective was, to corrupt Lilith, a god from the mother pathway which originated from her. She knew this all along, it's fucking trap. He couldn't allow something like that to happen. Because everything will be destroyed at that moment. Even though it seemed like an eternity, it has only been seconds since she emerged. But, before he could do anything, he felt her attention turn totally to him. A distorted voice resonated, capable of driving even archangels insane. It was in a language, which was unknown to anyone on the earth. However, he still clearly understood it. You are different. She spoke while looking at him, as the entire actual red world twisted and blurred, as if unable to endure her voice. Chapter 20, Supernova. Different? Arcus didn't anticipate her to find something about him, but he couldn't think any further about it because she was floating above him, attempting to corrupt Lilith and most likely him as well. Sun. As he stared back at her, he exclaimed aloud. In front of the indescribable figure, a terrifying golden sun arose. The golden sun emitted an infinite amount of pure light as it shined down on the bloody planet beneath it. The golden rays descended on the depraved world below like veils of light, and wherever the veil dropped, everything lit up with golden fire. The fleshy mountains, which seemed to be composed of humanoids' bodies with no skin, had been amalgamated together to form the mountains, which virtually filled the entire planet with a blood river running through them. As everything visible melted under the rays of golden sun, the fleshy mountains caught on fire. The bodies of the humanoids on the mountains began to shake as if they were alive, and anguished inhuman howls filled the planet, for golden light lit up everything, forming an ocean of flames. As the golden rays of the sun illuminated the river, the blood river began to evaporate, with abominations that was burning. Vav! Vav! Cries of infants resonated from the torrent of blood, while the sun rays still shone brightly with no intention of receding at all. Mother Goddess of Depravity was completely indifferent in the scarlet and golden sky, gazing at the sun, which was illuminating her body with rays, but the sun couldn't harm her in the least. Arcus, on the other hand, snapped his fingers just then. Snap! The golden sun went entirely white as the surroundings reality and space disintegrated, unable to bear the sun's rays any longer. The sun began to extend indefinitely, as if it wished to engulf this depraved world, and its core began to contract. Seeing this, Mother Goddess of Depravity also used her authority. Around the white sun, an infinite blood ocean capable of corrupting all in existence emerged, in the hopes of corrupting the sun itself, as well as Arcus with it. However, it was too late. A white sun pulsated visibly, as if it had infinite power, poised to unleash nothing but destruction when released. The sun emitted a scorching and inconceivable brightness, melting the blood ocean of Mother Goddess of Depravity. As it entered the state of supernova, the white sun entirely imploded. Boom! As it surged out of the sun, a sea of light almost filled the entire depraved planet. Everything was entirely annihilated as the light engulfed in it, whether it was an ocean of blood, reality, space, or knowledge, nothing was spared. Arcus emerged at the last moment before Lilith and Artisan, who were both absolutely unable to bear the authority that the Mother Goddess of Depravity exerted when she appeared. Artisan was kneeling on the ground, his face twisted in pain as he held his head. Various fissures appeared in his body, revealing mechanical parts rather than blood and flesh, yet crimson blood began to flow out of his mechanical parts, and flesh began to appear on it as well. Lilith was in even worse shape, as her white gown was saturated in blood and scarlet blood poured from her eyes, ears, and mouth. She let out inhumane screams from her throat, as if she was in unimaginable pain. Despite the fact that Lilith was a god, she was the one who suffered the most because her path and power came from the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Despite their dreadful situation, Arcus gazed at them, their lives still within grasp of saving. Lilith had not yet been corrupted, as the Mother Goddess of Depravity focused her attention entirely on him, after arriving, only sparing her a glance. One could argue that his existence saved Lilith from certain death. Boom! He punched the crimson ground in front of him without hesitation, his right fist coated in golden flames, for he realized the scorching light of supernova was not far away from them, annihilating and devouring everything in this depraved world. Despite the fact that nothing would happen to him, but it cannot be said the same for Lilith and Artisan in their current condition. With the appearance of the Mother Goddess of Depravity, Arcus noted that the reality created by Sephiroth extended considerably, which included not just this planet. Contrarily, the ground before him disintegrated, revealing infinite space with gleaming stars beneath. Arcus carried Lilith in both hands, and Artisan floated behind him, teleported near the shattered ground he had formed immediately. He needed to escape from this collapsing planet and away from Mother Goddess of Depravity, because Lilith's condition didn't allow her from being near Mother Goddess of Depravity. She will undoubtedly be corrupted right away. Also, Mother Goddess of Depravity's power that reached across the barrier was far below her true might, despite being tremendous for even gods to face. Because the barrier was still intact, even though slightly weakened. Even his supernova would have no effect on her if he was facing her true body. As he held Lilith, Arcus finally turned to face the collapsing world. Then, he began to fall back into the broken ground. An artisan, who had been floating beside him, plummeted with him. Everything in Ossis's vision slowed down, as if time itself had decelerated, while he gazed at a white ball of light in the sky spewing a scorching glare that disintegrated everything it touched. As he fell behind, Ossis's lips twisted into a maniacal smile, his face was completely pale, and his arms that held Lilith trembled. Even if everything appeared to be working in his favor, doing this was far from straightforward, as Ossis's was entirely concentrated and developed endless plans in his thoughts within a second of fully analyzing the situation and executing it. He was careful not to make a single error, as this could lead to his imminent death. He also used almost all of his powers and didn't hold back at all. Ossis's heart was racing as he realized how crazy this world and his life had become. Despite being a god above all, he felt entirely helpless in the position he had found himself in, which he believed to be dangerous but not fatal like this. He laughed maniacally, releasing all of his feelings. As he fell, however, something extended out of the light from the corner of his slowed vision. A bloody tentacle approached him, as if it wanted to claim his life. As he realized this, Ossis's smile didn't fade. He also did not show any panic. "Fuck you, bitch." He didn't hesitate to curse the pillar herself. Before the bloody tentacle could reach him, he finally fell through the broken ground into vast starry space below. With his departure, the depraved world also completely collapsed in his supernova. However, distorted roars filled with rage and madness could still be heard echoing. Chapter 21, Sun and Moon. There was a blue star amid the vast starry space created by Sephiroth, with many planets orbiting around it. The very space on one of the planets that was covered in snow and ice tore apart like paper. A white-haired man with a blood-stained dress walked out of it, holding a woman in both hands, and a brown-haired man floated alongside him. Ossis's knelt in the snow, crystal snow falling on his face, icy touch on his hands, chilly wind blowing on his figure. Everything felt so real. Then, Ossis's looked up at the blue star, while taking a few deep breaths to calm himself down, since his mental and physical state was worsening. But, the situation, however, did not allow him to relax and adjust. He put Lilith and Artisan on the snowy ground around him. He placed his hands on both of their foreheads without hesitation after seeing their anguished expressions. When he touched the crimson blood that was on their foreheads, though, he flinched slightly. The crimson blood felt like a magma that had burst out of the earth's core, burning his hands, as if wanting to prevent him from healing them. For a brief moment, Ossis's felt a little silly, as a god of the sun, he had been scorched, and if word got out, his built reputation would crumble. In this situation, what the fuck am I thinking? Ossis's cursed himself while also realizing his own bad mental state. It has to be because of that bitch. Despite his fluctuating emotions and conflicting thoughts, he pressed on their foreheads, ignoring the scorching blood. The contact produced a flash of golden light that beamed on both Artisan and Lilith's figures. Under the radiance of golden light, the blood on Lilith's body evaporated, and the flesh on Artisan's mechanical inner part dissolved as well. They healed visible to the naked eye, as his countenance became paler. Lilith opened her eyes after what seemed like an eternity of excruciating anguish. The pain before began, as she rested her eyes on the inexplicable figure that had dawned on them, and the distorted murmurs echoed in her mind, affecting her soul. She was terrified because the murmurs were familiar to her. It was the one who tormented her during her time as an ancient god, nearly driving her insane. It was the one who compelled her to devise a scheme to save herself by faking her death. She later learned the source of the murmurs from ancient sun god, a pillar of cosmos, the origin of evil, mother goddess of depravity. At the moment, every fiber of her being screamed in terror and her eyes shrank in fear as the indescribable being stared at her. She instinctively knew who it was and that it had come specifically for her. She also knew they had fallen into a well-planned trap. She tried to do anything, to flee, even to shout for help, but it was futile as she collapsed to the ground, her vision and throat filled with scarlet blood, as blood and cries were the only things that could come out of her mouth. Her entire life flashed before her eyes in that moment, as she felt hopeless. She knew what would happen to her next, and it was far worse than the death that so many feared. She was desperate to use her power. It was pointless, though, because her powers were entirely useless, as if something was preventing her from using it. Finally, she saw a blaze of light approaching her in her hazy vision, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. She even believed it was far better for the light to consume and evaporate her than to suffer and lose herself under it. However, she was lifted and held, and she remembered the warm hands around her, which helped to alleviate her anguish. She had a glimmer of hope in her heart at that time. Then, after what seemed like a lifetime, the golden light covered her vision, liberating her from the anguish and whispers. Lilith finally looked around, her attention finally falling on a figure who appeared to be trembling. Aucas's! Lilith exclaimed as she observed the state of Aucas's, which was rapidly deteriorating. She desperately stood up without caring for her state and ran to him, placing her hands on his back. Her authority of life acted on Aucas's as her hands began to glow green, pouring near endless life force into him from her hands. Aucas's didn't refuse her help, as his state began to heal far more quickly than theirs under Lilith's influence. His pale face regained its vitality, and his dimmed golden iris began to glow again. It's wonderful. Aucas's spoke softly as he felt the immense life force soaking into him, mending him physically and mentally, and restoring him to his peak state. He felt so comfortable, so much so, that he didn't want it to end. Did we escape? Lilith asked, dread evident in her eyes as she observed his condition improving. And, what happened? It's a pity, because I wanted to stay like this all day. But, she will discover us soon. Aucas's murmured to himself. He said this while laying his finger on Lilith's forehead, and a light flashed into her forehead from his tip of his finger. Lilith didn't resist, and she soon saw all that had transpired in her thoughts, from the supernova to him saving her. But, before she could say anything to thank him, Aucas's rose up and walked away from her, leaving her in loss. We're running out of time, Umbella. Aucas's spoke gravely to her as he walked over to the artisan, who was dazed and had dull eyes. My supernova won't be able to keep her for very long. The snowy ground began to shake as he spoke, as if to confirm his words. But, while standing before Artisan, who literally had a look of doubting life, Aucas's ignored it. It's hard to blame Artisan, because even he was caught off guard by the turn of events, let alone him. Artisan! Aucas's called out, jolting the artisan out of his daze, and his eyes regained clarity. What just happened? Artisan asked, his voice quivering. Listen. Stop asking questions and do exactly what I say without a second thought. If you want us to make it. Aucas's stated, while Artisan continued to nod without hesitation, as if he, too, was aware of the gravity of the situation. Take out your historical scroll and write down everything you can about the ruins we saw right away. Aucas's gave the order despite knowing full well that he would later regret it. But, he didn't show much hesitation, though, given what was on the line. It'll only take a few moments. As he removed a bronze scroll and pen from his coat, Artisan began to enter everything as per instruction of the sun god. I can get that for you. Aucas's finally turned to face Lilith, who stood behind him. Her face had eased, and there was no longer any fear in her eyes, despite knowing what they are going to face. Can we make it? Lilith inquired, her voice surprisingly calm. If we go all out together. Aucas's said lightly, as he and Lilith turned to face the sky, as they noticed something approaching this snowy planet. The planet's blue sky turned crimson almost instantly, as a terrifying beam of crimson light descended from the sky toward them. The crimson light beam, which seemed to be filled with infinite spiritual power and capable of tearing anything apart in existence, nearly covered the entire sky. Image here. Artisan trembled as he noticed this, his pen-holding fingers quivering, but he didn't dare to stop. Aucas's expression finally became serene, as he realized that if he wanted to survive the next fight, he would have to put everything on the line and even go beyond his limits. She is not as strong as we believe she is. He finally said to Lilith, smiling, as a blazing light erupted from his hand, forming a spear of light. Aucas's aimed his light spear at the crimson beam that blanketed the entire sky and threw it. As it blazed across the sky, the spear of light grew larger and larger, almost reaching the size of a crimson beam, leaving a trail of light in its wake. As the light spear and the crimson beam collided. Boom! On impact, a terrifying explosion occurred, ripping the very fabric of reality. Like a dazzling sun, the spear of light exploded into a mass of brilliant light. A crimson moon formed when the red beam of light collapsed into itself. The appearance of the sun and moon caused the entire snowy world to crumble and collapse, unable to withstand the celestial body's power. The first battle between gods and great old ones erupted. Simultaneously, in the Solomon Empire. A handsome man with deep starry blue eyes and black hair stood near the window of a Gothic castle nestled alongside a mountain range, gazing at the blood moon that shone through the sky despite the darkness attempting to block it. Bethel. In the room where that black-haired man stood, a voice came from nowhere. Bethel Abraham instantly turned to face the priest who had entered his home without permission. "I apologize, Adam." As if he knew what the priest was going to ask, Bethel spoke up. "I am unable to help in this situation." Chapter 22, Door. "I knew you'd say something like that." Adam spoke as he walked out of the Gothic-style room's shadows, which were still illuminated by the blood light of the moon, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Bethel shook his head and spoke lightly. "Adam, you make it sound so bad. It's not that I don't want to help, it's just that no matter how hard I tried, nothing would change. My door authority is far from enough." Adam approached Bethel, taking a moment to look around the room before speaking. "There's a lot on the line now, Bethel." While looking out the window at the blood moon behind the Bethel, Adam said. "Much more than you can imagine. I believe I understand what's at stake, Adam. But it cannot change the facts." Bethel stated sternly. "My door authority will have no effect on the barrier, as I am a still king of angels, not a god. And the anchor that allowed the moon's power to bypass the barrier is also extremely powerful. As you can see, Amon-Ines, Leodro, Hirabergen, and even Solomon have already used their power to stop it. However, it has only reduced some of its power. How do you expect me to accomplish what you want?" "I know, but believe me," Adam stated. "And simply exert your authority. It may give them more of a chance." "Ouroboros," Adam called unexpectedly as he turned to look backwards. A man with long silver hair and white angelic wings appeared in the room, wearing white robes and holding a silver cross. "Adam." Ouroboros' tone was apathetic as he nodded to greet Adam, but he just stared at Bethel, with no intention of reciprocating. "You came well prepared." As he saw this, Bethel said. Adam made no comment on this, but he did address an important issue. "If your situation becomes critical, Ouroboros will use reboot to help you and let us escape." "So you want me to believe you?" Bethel finally asked, even though he stood before two kings of angels, his eyes unfalteringly calm. "And visionary at that. You don't have much of choice." Adam's tone was calm, and Bethel couldn't figure out whether this was a threat or if he was simply stating facts given the circumstances. Bethel looked at Adam deeply for a moment before nodding and waving his hands in the air as the three of them vanished from his Gothic-style house in Solomon Empire. In the vast astral world, which was even more abstract than the spirit world, seemed to encompass all of the universe's authorities and symbolism. It had an invisible barrier that separated the Earth from the rest of the cosmos. They appeared just before the barrier, as a ray of light illuminating the darkness surrounding them. A black-colored book immediately appeared in front of Bethel, and it opened, as the pages flipped on their own. It came to a halt in the page which had symbol of closed door, and when Bethel tapped it, the door lit up with blue light and slowly emerged from the book and flew towards the barrier. And it merged with the invisible barrier right away. At the same time, Adam's aura grew vast and terrifying, briefly surpassing the level of King of Angels as he held a golden cross that was shining brightly in his hands. Indifference replaced his warm and calm expression. Ouroboros' silver eyes rippled as he stared at the Adam, as he couldn't believe the transformation. He almost had the feeling that he had faced his fallen lord for a fleeting moment. The door authority was effective on the barrier. Adam proclaimed solemnly in front of the barrier, as if speaking a prophecy, and then immediately various blue ripples appeared on the surface of the barrier. The barrier becoming visible in the astral world under the blue light that began to cover the barrier. As the enhanced seal separated the space inside the barrier and began severing the connection of the crimson moon with the anchor on the Earth, the barrier began to strengthen under the door authority. On Earth, the blood moon became visibly dim, as if it might vanish at any moment. Boom! But just then the barrier shook as something slammed into it, dimming the shimmering blue barrier. A massive indescribable face clinged on the barrier, with various bloody tentacles. Countless eyes on its face peered out from behind the barrier at the three of them. Roar! A rage-filled roar erupted in the vast astral world, causing the barrier itself to tremble under its wrath. The mother goddess of depravity's countless eyes were filled with madness and anger as they gazed at Bethel. Bethel's figure began to tremble as mother goddess of depravity appeared, and blood began to dye his clothes. His blue eyes had begun to turn crimson. But, Bethel's expression remained unchanged as he stood before the pillar of cosmos without fear or panic. "Can you maintain it?" Ouroboros asked, having noticed his condition. "Everything is fine. We managed to stop some of its influence, but it's still not enough, despite the situation," Bethel said calmly, shaking his head towards Adam. On Earth, the brilliance of a blood moon that was beginning to fade, restored under the roar of Mother Goddess of Depravity. Adam nodded as his aura faded and became noticeably weaker than it had been. Even so, he didn't care and looked through the barrier at the Mother Goddess of Depravity. When the Mother Goddess of Depravity gazed at Adam, its rage increased all of a sudden, as evidenced by the reverberating roars in the astral world. When Adam realized this, his expression was still indifferent without slight change. Before, he didn't proclaim that the connection of cosmos is severed with the authority of Dor taking effect, because even he couldn't do something like that in his current state. It's now up to them. Adam's voice echoed out in the astral realm. We did everything we could. The brilliance of a golden sun and crimson moon illuminated the vast starry space, causing the entire snowy planet to collapse completely, with the entire planet literally breaking into pieces soon. A handsome man appeared floating right before the vast sun. Despite the fact that the man was tiny in comparison to the golden sun, the divine aura emanating from him completely dwarfed the golden sun. He was dressed in silver armor that gleamed in the sun's rays. He was wielding a long white spear with golden streaks down it. The man wore no helmet visor, exposing his face with angular features and golden iris, which glowed and surged like a burning sun behind him. Ocasys raised his spear to the crimson moon and declared, his voice reverberating across the vast starry space. I say it's ineffective. Chapter 23, Infinity. I declare it's ineffective. Ocasys declared, raising his spear to the crimson moon, his voice reverberating across the vast starry space. The crimson moon dimmed and the moon's surface began to change as the blood sea that was flowing around the moon began to evaporate, turning the moon back to silver, like it was before in the past civilization. Under his declaration, the very authority that Mother Goddess of Depravity used to corrupt the moon was being removed. However, the crimson sea on the moon surged all of a sudden, as it began emitting crimson light, which quickly covered the entire moon, stopping the transformation, and the effect of his declaration was removed with it. Immediately after that, the crimson moon changed visibly, becoming illusory and ethereal before finally transforming into an indescribable being with countless bloody tentacles and eyes. Mother Goddess of Depravity. The mere appearance of the Mother Goddess of Depravity caused an ocean of blood to appear in space, completely corrupting the surrounding reality. This also prevented Ocasys from using order authority, because reality is under her control, his law will have no effect. So, there was no other way than to make everything fall into chaos. Sun. At that precise moment, his deep voice could be heard. Now, directly in front of her, and in the blood ocean, countless miniature suns bloomed in brilliance, instantly illuminating this planetary system. The light of the countless miniature suns caused the ocean of blood to melt, unable to withstand the scorching heat any longer. Mother Goddess of Depravity just looked at the suns, causing some to instantly transform into crimson moons or simply dissolve in the blood ocean. Then, Ocasys appeared before the blood ocean's edge and waved his spear in the space. Die in this ocean of light, bitch. He spoke with a grin, and immediately all of the remaining miniature suns turned white, emitting a scorching glare, just like the sun that had gone supernova before. Boom. Then they all imploded as the miniature sun's blazing light immediately engulfed the blood ocean and Mother Goddess of Depravity. The light then began to spread throughout the entire planetary system, obliterating everything in its path. Light consumed everything, including the blue star in the center, planets revolving around it, and asteroids, before annihilating it. From afar, one would see an ocean of light almost completely engulfing this planetary system in almost an instant. It was a sight to behold. An entire planetary system no smaller than the solar system faced extinction under the light of Ocasys. He was able to easily destroy this planetary system because it was not influenced by the authority of Mother Goddess of Depravity, as opposed to the blood world, which was a manifestation of her authority, so he went all out. As Ocasys stood in the ocean of light, painful roars echoed around him, but even hearing the roars didn't make him happy as he thought, because the powerful life force emanating from her only reduced just slightly. Is that why they call her the Indestructible? Ocasys also noticed that the Mother Goddess of Depravity's power was dwindling out of nowhere, as if something was attempting to interrupt her power coming from the astral world. He could guess that it was the other in the outside world, helping them, but still he didn't dare to underestimate her. He also did not allow Lilith to enter the battlefield until Artisan finished filling the historical scroll completely, as there is still a major risk for Lilith to enter the battlefield without any protection from the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Suddenly, the roars vanished, and with them, all of his senses screamed in danger. He didn't hesitate to turn to his left and raise his hand, and in an instant, a shield of pure light formed on his hands. Boom! A beam of light struck his shield just then, but it wasn't crimson, but rather completely pitch dark. When the dark beam hit him, it also instantly extinguished the very concept of light by dying and corrupting everything in the ocean of light around the planetary system. Ocas's was using all of his strength to keep the light shield in place while resisting the black beam of light, as his right hand trembling holding the shield. He also felt nothing but endless malice from the dark beam. The malice began to affect him, invoking evil thoughts in his mind and attempting to influence him in the battle. It made him shiver, for he even had some thoughts that this darkness is nothing other than the manifestation of pure evil. His golden iris glowed, and pure light erupted from his form, instantly dispelling the effects. Crack! Just then, his light shield resisting the dark beam began to break, seemingly unable to bear it anymore. Under an command of Mother Goddess of Depravity, the darkness in his surroundings moved closer to him in an attempt to corrupt him. Ocas's heartbeat slowed as he took a long breath, then he dispelled the light shield instantly, without hesitation. In the endless darkness, Ocas's floated, his figure emitting pure light. As if sensing this, the filthy darkness moved in an attempt to extinguish this pure light, and above it all, a dark beam of light was heading towards him. Ocas's expression were unwaveringly calm as he floated in the middle of this, looking at the dark beam of light that was approaching him. He raised his right hand and crossed his middle and index fingers, forming a symbol. He intended to use a conceptual move he created based on the power of one of his favorite anime characters in his previous life. Infinity. As he used his authority of order, his calm voice reverberated in the endless darkness. One bright star after another appeared in the uncorrupted space around him. With the appearance of the stars, the very order of space began to change. The authority of order strengthened the space itself to be able to withstand corruption and destructive power. Then, under order authority, space began to expand infinitely, and the stars in the fabric of space stretched with it, extending like lines of light around Ocas's. When the dark beam and filthy darkness collided with the expanding space, they both came to a halt for a brief moment before being pulled away from Ocas's by infinitely expanding space. Chapter 24, Human Civilization. Infinity. Endless. Boundless. Ocas's floated in the vast expanse of the space, with light streaks extending around him in the very fabric of space. For a brief moment, he felt space expand to become truly boundless. Even the Mother Goddess of Depravity appeared to be affected by the boundless space and vanished into the horizon. As he couldn't hear her distorted angry roars any longer, which was a comfort to his ears. As the roars of the Mother Goddess of Depravity were nothing short of a conglomeration of all blasphemous sounds in the cosmos, they could literally drive anyone who heard them to commit suicide in order to get reprieve from the sound, at least in death. It really worked. Ocas's thought as he tightened his grip on his white spear, his gaze roving over the infinite space surrounding him. It has a much larger impact than I anticipated. He created that technique not long ago, but he never had the chance to test it before applying it directly here. He wasn't sure he'd succeed, so he was always planning another attack just in case. Mother Goddess of Depravity. Ocas's considered her with a headache, as the situation was deteriorating into a battle of attrition. But he knew they'd lose if this went on, because they'd be no match for her in that scenario. This reality. Ocas's took a look at this recently formed reality. I need to completely destroy this reality. He couldn't think of any other solution because this was the only way to solve everything. Rather than fighting a battle to see who manages to survive the longest. But saying something is one thing, actually doing it is quite another. The appearance of the Mother Goddess of Depravity reinforced the reality here. He felt before, the reality expanding at an incredible rate, massive enough to fit even different planetary systems, at that precise moment before she arrived ahead of them. He didn't know if this was her work or the power of Sephiroth, but it didn't matter anymore. Lilith. Ocas's thoughts turned as he remembered Lilith's authority over life, which can create and take life, as well as the desolate which can wither the very reality. Lilith and Artisan are in different space, with Artisan completing the historical scroll and Lilith protecting Artisan. They would not enter the battlefield until Artisan finished it completely. All the while, he is fighting Mother Goddess of Depravity, to prevent her from reaching Lilith. What if we combined our authorities? Ocas's was devising various strategies to win the battle, also never letting his guard down and constantly scrutinizing his surroundings, for even his godly perception couldn't actually detect her. Even though his thoughts were numerous, so much so, it may appear that a long time had passed, but it had only been a few seconds. Boom! The lines of light in the space around him dimmed and faded, taking with them the authority of order that was acting on the space, which was also erased by another vast force that appeared. Ocas's tightened his grip on his spear as he realized this, and pure white light began to gather in the tip of the spear. Then, it appeared. Holy crap! He was completely taken aback by the structure that was appearing in front of him. There is no limit to her. He saw something tearing the very fabric of reality and destroying the infinite space so easily before him. A swirling mass of darkness tore out of the space, extending out and occupying everything in this space within next moment. The darkness swirled as countless wails or screams of pain and terror echoed from within it. This structure had many layers, each of which housed abominations and souls of multiple races who were either tortured or wandered aimlessly. Various alien faces that looked nothing like human morphed on the edge of the swirling mass of darkness, but they all had one thing in common: they were screaming in pure terror and fear. Above all of this manifestation was her, with countless eyes filled with nothing but rage, as she stared at him, as if she couldn't wait to tear him apart. Ocas's stood in front of this structure, his figure dwarfed by its enormous size, which occupied almost the entire reality in his perception. A thought came to him out of nowhere as he gazed at it. He felt this was nothing but a manifestation of all that is ugly, chaotic, and, most importantly, evil in the infinite cosmos. Why does it resemble the infinite abyss? Ocas's noticed the resemblance. He wasn't talking about the abyss on Earth, but about another abyss in one of the famous games from his previous life. Is this her manifestation of authority of evil? The thoughts flashed in his mind, before he completely focused on her. Now even though Ocas's was facing something like this, he was just solemn and didn't show any panic in least. The pure light gathered on the tip became blazingly bright, literally holding the power to purify anything evil, gave him confidence. To be honest, his light authority is nemesis to her now. Roar! As the abyss moved, her furious roar resounded. The abyss then literally fell towards him, carrying the power to destroy and corrupt all in existence. Boom! Boom! As it descended towards him, space and reality tore in its path. Light! Ocas's pointed his spear at the falling abyss and declared. A beam of pure light erupted from its spear tip, growing in size as it approached the descending abyss. Boom! The pure light beam collided with swirling filth darkness, shattering reality. The pure light evaporated some of the filthy darkness in the abyss while the filthy darkness started corrupting the pure light and trying to turn it darkness. But soon, there was balance between both sides, as their authorities just kept colliding, with no side having an advantage over the other. It had become a classic situation, or more of a cliché, because it was now good vs evil and light vs darkness. Mother Goddess of Depravity was enraged when she saw her authority being challenged by a mere god of earth. Even though her current power is far from her true might, it still enraged her, as it was the first time she had faced a situation like this since the fall of the other two pillars. As he observed the stalemate, Ocas's wanted to use some of his other authorities to break the deadlock. But just then a flash of green light appeared behind him, and a deep voice echoed through the space. Death! Immediately, a portion of the abyss trembled and became illusory before fading out of the very existence, giving the light beam an advantage as the entire abyss began to evaporate under the pure light. Ocas's felt relieved when he noticed Lilith appearing near him. For this entire battle had been far from easy, and it was truly tremendous to face a pillar alone, even if she was weakened. He desperately needed assistance in this situation. Lilith appeared from the green light, and before, she used her authority of life to deprive the very life from the abyss. Because the abyss was a manifestation of Mother Goddess of Depravity's authority, it contained her will, so it can also be considered as a life, so her authority was effective, not only affecting the abyss, but also injuring her. Mother Goddess of Depravity's rage faded as she saw Lilith and she no longer cared about other things. Immediately, she used her authority to corrupt Lilith. Lilith was nervous and anxious at the moment, unsure whether Ocas's plan would succeed. She didn't dare to come to the battlefield before because Mother Goddess of Depravity could easily corrupt her at that time, as her pathway originated from her. Even Ocas's couldn't prevent this from happening. Just as Lilith began to feel a connection with her, an illusory light shot out of the void, revealing picture-like projections around Lilith and Ocas's. Some of them recorded humans' helplessness and misery when confronted by supernatural beings. Some of them used an epic-like brush to reenact scenes of humans fusing with beyonder ingredients to gain strength and save the race. Some described the distinct cultures and traditions brought about by a black emperor, while others carried various points of view, books, and inventions. It didn't stop there, as a massive image appeared in the projection, dwarfing everything else. It depicted the ruins of a long-forgotten civilization and the miracles that they achieved without the use of any extraordinary means. The contents made the seemingly thin scroll exude a heaviness and majestic aura that quickly enveloped the entire reality. It made anyone who looked at it feel the grandeur of this civilization, which even managed to pass on the fire and flourish again. The history left behind by hundreds of millions of humans before and after the apocalypse was vast and magnificent. The might of the entire human civilization shielded Lilith and thwarting the attempts of the mother goddess of depravity, pillar of cosmos. Chapter 25, Sword. The projection swirled around Ocas's, depicting civilization's progress and development through the ages. As he looked at it, he became slightly depressed. He is human, even if he is not biologically human, since he is now a mythical creature, or, more precisely, his existence is similar to that of an abstract entity that is anything but human. However, despite the vastly different circumstances in this and previous lives, he still considers himself human, for he was born as a human in both of his lives. So seeing all of this had a big impact on him for a moment, especially when some tried to combine with the characteristics that evoked some of his past memories, which he wanted to avoid. Ocas's was born in the second epoch and had never met his parents. For all he knew, he was always all alone from the beginning. He danced on the edge of a knife every day in that depraved era when humans were at the bottom of the food chain and were even raised as livestock by mythical races. There was no morality in that era, for law of jungle reigned supreme. You could just be looking for food one day, but there's also a huge chance you could have an accidental encounter with a mad ancient god. That time period was truly insane. Those who managed to survive that period went through literal hell. And he was able to survive because he possessed power of light. To be more specific, he would be equivalent to sequence 5 of this era. He also saw many people attempting to combine with the characteristics in order to become stronger and survive. Despite the fact that he also accumulated many characteristics with which he felt affinity towards, but he never attempted to combine them recklessly. As he saw what could happen if it failed, the thought of losing all humanity and becoming a mindless monster always haunted him. But his life was turned upside down when the war ravaged the land, destroying his hope and life in the process. He still remembered his teenage self running from the horde of demons chasing him, while holding the characteristics in his hand. The demons were far more powerful than him. It drove him to desperation, to the point where he didn't care about the consequences and instead wanted to combine with the characteristics to just have silver of chance. However, that's when his life changed, because he ran into someone at that precise moment. It was a man dressed in black clergy robes with a silver cross around his neck. He had pure golden eyes that was like the sun. He also had a black slate in his hands. When Ocas's looked at the man at the time, he had the illusion that he was looking at the literal sun itself for a brief moment. That man saved him that day and forever changed his life. Ocas's felt somewhat complex as memories of that time flashed through his mind, but he quickly pushed the thoughts aside and looked at Lilith, who was actually smiling. "Your plan really worked." Lilith's voice was slightly trembling as she spoke. She didn't realize whether it was happiness or overwhelming relief that washed over her, finally knowing she wasn't going to die. Indeed. When Ocas's eyes met Lilith's, he smiled slightly as the complexity in his eyes faded. At the same time, a figure appeared out of thin air behind them, revealing Artisan. "I didn't expect." Artisan mumbled to himself as he looked at his work. It truly astounded him at the power of civilization at the time, which could block a pillar. He knew what a pillar represented, which only added to his astonishment at what they had accomplished. Even though humanity is small in the infinite cosmos, we are capable of performing impossible feats and miracles when we work together. Ocas's spoke lightly, his gaze fixed on the Ariston. He wasn't surprised by their success now, in fact, he expected it. It wouldn't be wrong to say that the entire human civilization was shielding them and protecting them from the literal pillar of cosmos at the time. This scroll is much stronger than it was in the original future, when Artisan used it during Klein's apotheosis. This will also give Artisan a significant advantage when he ascends to Paragon. Ocas's would not be surprised if the Artisan named himself God of Steam and Machinery rather than God of Craftsmanship. Ocas's knew it was all because of his own decisions, which had drastically altered the future at this point. However, given his current situation, he no longer cares about the future. Roar! A rage-filled roar shook the entire projection, as blood ocean covered it and waves of oceans trashed into the scroll, attempting to break it apart. "This will only buy us some time, but it won't last long against her," Lilith said as she gazed at the blood ocean, her heart finally calmed down. In this situation, there is only one way to win. Ocas's face became solemn as he spoke. "Because if this continues, this situation will devolve into an attrition battle, which we will lose. So, let's annihilate this entire reality. Ocuses said it simply, as if it were nothing more than a simple task. Artisan was once again taken aback by the sun god's bold new idea. But, after seeing what they had accomplished, he had no doubts in the sun god anymore. How are we going to pull it off? Lilith immediately questioned. She also appeared to believe Ocuses' crazy plan. Can you make a weapon right away? Ocuses did not respond to Lilith, instead questioning the artisan. Yes. Artisan nodded before pulling another golden glittering scroll from his coat and opening it. We simply enter the information into this scroll. Then it will be completed, but there is a requirement for characteristics, for the weapon to have some power, or it will be nothing more than ordinary. Artisan explained. Give it to me. Ocuses grabbed the scroll right away, opened it, and instructed. Umbella bless the authority of the Desolate on the weapon while it is forming. Lilith didn't hesitate to follow his instructions, pressing her hand against the scroll, brown light erupting from the contact and illuminating it. Ocuses tapped his finger on the golden scroll at the same time, and as light also appeared from the contact, an image of the weapon began to form on the scroll according to his memories. He also blessed his authority of sun and order at this moment. Instead of using the characteristics, Ocuses simply planned to replace it with their authorities, which the weapon should be able to withstand. Soon, the image of the weapon was fully formed, thanks to the blessings of two gods and combination of various authorities. Ocuses is doing this rather than simply combining Lilith and his authorities to pull an ultimate move, because while combining the authorities sounds simple, it takes a lot of time, which they don't have right now. As a result, he couldn't think of a more efficient solution than creating a weapon, which takes far less time. Boom! Boom! The projection around them was becoming increasingly blurry, as if it was about to break under the assault of the mother goddess of depravity. Ocuses didn't hesitate any longer, and tapped the image of the weapon, causing it to light up and ripples appeared around the scroll. The weapon then slowly emerged from the scroll, under their attention. It was a weapon that was golden and red in color. It appeared to be a sword, but it had an unusual shape that did not correspond to what would normally be classified as something specialized like a sword. It felt more like something that existed before the concept known as a sword appeared in the world. As a result, it is not a true sword, nor does it have the shape of any known blade. This weapon was based on the Sword of Rupture, EA, which also had the ability to tear the entire reality apart. Ocuses took the handle of the sword that had formed according to his memories. The sword in his hands spun as the aura of annihilation began to radiate from it, with red light covering the entire sword. Take away the scroll. Then he yelled at Artisan as he noticed the projection dimming and the eyes of the mother goddess of depravity staring at him from behind it. The projection vanished, and they were confronted by Mother Goddess of Depravity, who was floating directly in front of them. Ocuses aimed the sword at her, and surprisingly, she seemed to have anticipated this, as a crimson curtain appeared around her and protected her, while the blood ocean flowed towards them. But Ocuses didn't care, and he poured all of his power into his weapon, causing it to visibly shake and crack. A blazing ball of red light gathered at the tip of the sword, which looked like a red sun from afar. This will be your last time on Earth. As he looked at her, he said with a grin on his lips. Die, bitch! Boom! The red sun in the sword imploded, causing scorching glare of red light to erupt and spread outward in all directions, submerging and annihilating everything in its path. As she saw what this earth god managed to pull up again, her eyes were filled with genuine shock. She used her reaming power without hesitation because she perceived a real threat from it. However, it was useless. The red light formed from their combined power tore the crimson curtain and immediately submerged her. The cries of anguish and rage echoed before dying away. Soon, the red light then engulfed this entire reality, annihilating everything. Crack! Crack! The reality created by Sephiroth eventually started breaking under their combined power and began to show cracks all over, as if it were nothing more than a broken mirror. Boom! Finally, reality collapsed on itself, as everything crashed and broke before their eyes like shards of mirror.
Thanks for listening.